Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Emails on the subject of tagging and other matters. Hugh, with the current ongoing threats in the country, we're having to use armed forces to assist police. Yet last week on your show, actually it was Monday, Hugh, we were told another 4,000 police officers in London were to be gone, could be lost. Surely any sane-thinking person in power should now be working to revise that paperwork. Thank you for that. Same subject. You see, Tommy, the Muslim community need to stand up in masses and show they're with us and show your support and elegance, you say, to Britain. Tommy, they have done that. There is a list, and this is in the Daily Mail, and many people criticise the Daily Mail and suggest that it has a rather hostile tone. Well, the Daily Mail has actually listed a number of imams who have said that this is not, and one of them even saying his crimes will pursue him in the afterlife. I mean, and here's an interesting thing. The imam at Didsbury Mosque, which is where Salman used to go, Mohammed Saeed, actually again it tells the Daily Mail, he stopped coming in 2015. He objected to anti-IS comments. So it's, you know, these mosques, they need to inform people. Well, he stopped going 2 years ago because they had such an anti-IS theme there. He didn't want to attend anymore. That's a clue to what they're doing in these mosques, I would suggest. They're trying to get the message across that this is not the future, and they're even saying today, in whatever afterlife he thought he was going to, he'll be haunted anyway. Let's come back to tagging. Craig in Folkestone. Do you agree with me, Craig? Tag them. Morning.
Morning, thanks for taking my call. I do agree with tagging. I also think that actually we should go a little bit further than tagging, and that the internment side of things, I don't know what the answer is, but the answer isn't let's just show solidarity and let's all come together and all of those sort of things. So it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the parents of the kids that tragically lost their lives in this event. It's absolutely shocking. But I'm tired of people saying let's have more security checks. There are 3,000 people, and every time one of these events happens, we say, oh, well, these people were known to the security services who are doing a fantastic job, but clearly haven't got the tools to be able to lock these people up or do something about it.
Yes.
And it just frustrates me. And at some point, we've got to look at ourselves in society and say that actually people who, and I agree with some of the previous callers around, you can't just go locking up people that look at how to make a bomb on the internet.
No, of course.
But but actually, if you add up all of the things that these people are doing, there must be a reason why they're known to security services. So whether we move to a more reasonable belief that these people are a threat to society and do something more with them, then we're not going to stop the problem.
Craig, thank you for that. I absolutely agree. Of course, we can't start locking up everybody just because they've been on the internet, but we do need to do more. David in Putney, you're on the radio. David, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Thanks for taking my call. I was very upset listening to James O'Brien yesterday. His show was very emotive and very moving.
Right.
We're all shocked by, but this is a shocker. Mothers and daughters was the demographic of the concert.
Yes.
And I agree with your last couple of calls. We need to start playing hardball, Nick. I'm as well fed up of hearing these men are on the watch list. They should be tagged. They should be not allowed to go to any stadia, they should be effectively imprison them at home until their beliefs have changed. I mean, hundreds went to fight for ISIS in Syria, and hundreds have returned.
Yes.
What's all that about? I mean,
if they return, I wouldn't let them back in. If they get back in, they wear a tag for the rest of their days.
Yeah, well, we shouldn't let them back in, and we can't deport anyone. Every time we try to deport someone, it takes 3 years. It costs the government 30 million quid. We can't beat this current terrorist threat with conventional means. We have to come together as a country. Our freedom and tolerance is being used against us.
You're right, David. Thank you for that. 8:57. You're listening to LBC News breaking this time in relation to the Manchester terror attack. The French Interior Minister, Gérard Collomb, has said that the Manchester bomber is believed now to have travelled to Syria and had, quotes, proven links with IS. That's coming from the French Interior Minister, Gérard Collomb. The Manchester bomber travelled to Syria and had, quotes, proven links with IS. Let's get another call in before the news. Omar in Cambridge. Tagging, yes or no? Omar, good morning.
Definitely yes. And if there are people who they think they should be following and they are not tagging them, they are not doing their job, to be honest, because as a Muslim, I'm even more angry about it because, this is supposedly done by Muslims and looks bad on us. As well as being the victims of themselves. Because I happen to have been in a concert with similar area with my kids, a few weeks ago, and it could have been me, it could have been my children.
Yes.
And at the same time, I'm kind of, blamed by some people being this is Islamic, whatever.
Well, it's not.
So yes, definitely up for it. But the other thing I have to say is,
in a sentence, if you would,
Why are we not going after the ISIS who are claiming openly they are behind it, where we went after Saddam Hussein, where he never killed any single British person in UK, said never threatened any person, and we went with a large scale to kill him, and we are not doing that with ISIS. I don't understand this at all.
Well, it's because you can't march on ISIS in the way that you did on Baghdad, because it was a known country. It's not like fighting Iraq or fighting the Germans. That's something we've looked at before, Omar. Thank you. The conversation continues. Kim says, yes, he wasn't born an extremist, it was learnt. It's his choice, I have no sympathy for him. Once the sadness of this horrible atrocity, the anger will come, and I'm sick to death of the comments where you can't do this or you can't do that. Same conversation as regards tagging the person. Anna says we need to push government not to let people back in Syria. We need to be tough and strip citizens of the terrorists and possibly their whole families. This comes from, where's your name? Dibby. The people returning from fighting for IS should be dealt with by a shadow civilian brigade? If the state doesn't... What do you mean by that? Do you mean... I hope you mean monitored. I trust you mean that, not something else. Sophie in King's Cross, you're on the radio. What do you want to tell me, Sophie? Good morning.
Hi, Nick. I'm a Muslim and I'm disgusted by what's happened, but I do feel that our community isn't doing enough to condemn what's been going on.
Right.
This behaviour is not Islamic behaviour. It's absolutely disgusting, but I just don't see them doing enough.
What should they... speaking as a Muslim woman, what should your community be doing then?
When you step inside a mosque, you should automatically see something that says, extreme views are not welcome here, and that should be very visible to everybody in our community and outside of our community. I mean, yesterday I was watching the news and I saw the Jewish community out in Manchester speaking to the news. I saw the Sikh community giving out water bottles and showing their support. I just don't feel that our community is doing enough, and that is probably why people outside of the community feel that we are to blame. So I just feel that they need to do more to stop this happening.
It's reported that the bomber stopped attending mosque 2 years ago because of the anti-IS theme or preachings or teachings, whatever you want to say. Does that come across at the mosque that you attend?
I don't think so, no. I mean, well, tell
me there's not a pro-IS message, Sophie.
No, of course not, no. But I just don't think there's enough being done when these people are showing those views in the mosque. Why is nothing being done about it? At the end of the day, they are Muslims. But, of course, they're not, good Muslims. They're terrible, horrible people. But why are our community not doing more to stop that behaviour and to find out where the root is, where the problem is starting?
Stay on the line, Sophie. I want to bring in another caller. Please stay where you are, Sophie. Sean's in Hampstead. Sean, I've got a note here that you're concerned about what Muslim people are saying. You must be refreshed to hear what Sophie's saying.
All I'm saying is I'm a common sense person, and I think that back in the day, if you take it very, very small, when different cultures came to this country, if there was an issue, it should have been dealt in the beginning. If you look on YouTube, when soldiers come back, British soldiers come back, they get attacked and beat. There's things on YouTube, radicalisation. In London, they grab a megaphone and they go down the roads. It's all legal because they all get it. Nothing gets
No, not anymore. It's not legal.
Yes.
No.
But
people have gone to jail.
When this happened, when these mosques came up, and the problem is, say, by the mosques or where the problem is, let's strike down hard and stop this. It's too late now, my friend.
When you say strike down hard, hold on, Sean. What do you mean strike down hard?
So I told you I'm a common sense person. Sort it out.
No, all right.
Great.
Okay, sort it out and strike it down hard. For the third time, what do you mean?
Colonized many, many countries, and you can't sort out stuff in your own city?
Right. What do you want to do?
Let's all hold hands and have a minute's silence, and then next month the same thing happens.
All right, and now if you'd stop being glib, I'll ask for the fourth time. What do you think we should do?
I'm not in the position.
So you don't know, do you?
I think
what you're screaming for is, I want action. So if somebody says, what action do you want? I don't know.
Well, I'm not educated to deal. I told you I'm a common sense person. I pay my tax and I look up and I respect the Queen and I respect the country.
All right, Sean, thank you. Last word to you, Sophie. When you hear responses such as that as concerns your faith, how do you feel? How do you react?
I can understand where that comes from, because we aren't doing enough to stop it. We aren't taking action, and we do need to do something as a community to show that we don't agree with this, and we feel the pain just as everybody else does. We don't, agree that this is right, and it's not something that normal Muslims do. So, I can understand where his views come from, but we as a community do need to do something more. It affects everybody, but we need to show that we stand against it.
Sophie, thank you. More calls in a moment. I mentioned before the travel update that the youngest victim known so far in the Manchester terror attack, and one of the youngest victims ever any terror attack in the country, is Safi Roussos. LBC's Ella Griffiths is outside the school that she attended. Ella?
Well, for the last hour, parents have been arriving at the school here with their children, dropping them off for the day, and they've been leaving bunches of flowers at the gates. There are notes and teddies too. Some of them say, "I will miss you, Safi, and you're the bestest friend in the world." This is a small village not far from Preston, and there's a real sense of devastation. People just can't believe that an 8-year-old from their community has lost her life in this way. Many of the parents I tried to speak to this morning were just too upset to speak. Many of them were getting tearful just saying how upset they were. Richard runs the local garage. He says it's been really difficult for people to come to terms with.
There was a tremendous show of support for the local families last night. They held a vigil in Mark Square in Tarleton, which was extremely well attended. It showed clear support for the families and that we are strong together as a community. I've come into work this morning and the parents in tears hugging each other on the side of the road. I really feel for the children. It's devastating. And I think the school's done a superb job. It only came out during the day yesterday, and all the children, while they were coming out, there's been some positive comments from local parents on how the school and the teachers, and the head teacher particularly, has dealt with it and looked after them. And there's plenty of support network. How can you unsee something like that? It's going to be etched in people's minds for a long time to come.
The school have described Safi's death as heartbreaking and say she was beautiful, quiet and creative. Students and staff are going to be getting special support to help them deal with the tragedy.
Ella Griffiths reporting. Ella, thank you. Also, an aspect that I want to reflect on. Why has it fallen to the French Interior Ministry, which is their equivalent of the Home Office, if it's correct, to tell us that the bomber had, quotes, proven links with IS? Why is the French telling us that? I'm going to return to this. We hear from the Prime Minister, Home Secretary, mayors, police officers. We will not be divided. We must stay calm. We must stay vigilant. Well, why aren't you also telling us, yes, he did have links with IS? Could it be that the actual prevent part of the strategy is, as that journalist and historian was saying earlier, a complete and utter failure? They will never give the number because they can hide behind security reasons. 3,000 people, quote, known. Well, probably 2,998 with the death of this bloke and the Westminster attacker. Between 6 and 9 TPIMs active. Let's say 7 then. Or let's be generous, 8. Why are we not hearing that from our own government? And if he had proven IS links, if we're not going to give him a tag or a TPIM, what the hell are we doing? And listen to this, my friend, there are more people coming back from the IS battlefields. Roshani's in Southfields. You're on the radio, Roshani. Good morning. What can you tell me?
Hello, good morning, Nick. I live in Southfields with a very large Muslim population, and my neighbours are actually Muslim, very nice people, but they don't integrate, and I think it's a problem for integration. In my son's school, there were 12 Muslim children out of 30, and I used to invite, girls and boys back home for parties, etc. They very rarely came, and I do think they don't see these atrocities as our problem. They live within their own culture and community. They don't integrate, Nick. That is the problem.
How? Because you can't force
some... I can speak about it because I'm Sri Lankan. I was born in Colombo.
Oh, right. I honeymooned there.
Totally integrated. We came in 1972, and I think it's a huge problem.
How can you force people to integrate?
You can't force people to integrate. You can't, but you can say something like that when you do come into another country. If you do emigrate, you are you do have to take on
Absolutely.
the country's. You have to take on the country's laws and culture. You know.
And do
you have
they?
to speak
So
the
their
language.
children don't come to your house very much. Do you?
Hardly ever now.
Do your children ever get invited to their homes?
I did once or twice, Nick, actually. But I used to invite the whole class for a party for my son, and he's 14 now, but it doesn't apply so much. And it's, you know, I used to actually phone the households because we'd have a list of telephone numbers, speak to the mums, and I'd speak to the mums in the playground because I was able to communicate with them, you know, just because of my personality, and I was able to talk to them and ask them, and it was very difficult. The children were not allowed to come to parties, Western parties. So.
It doesn't work, does it? Rashani, thank you for that story. Look after your children. Nida in Dartford, you're on the radio, Nida. Morning, what can you tell me?
Morning. I'm a Muslim, by the way, and my biggest concern now is that every time something like this happens, we hear a lot of condemnation, we hear promises the community is going to do more. My question now from the community and the government, for that matter, would be what evidence do we have that the community is doing more? How many calls does the reporting suspicious behavior in these areas? It's no coincidence that these people tend to live in specific neighborhoods, which I think in many cases are exclusively probably Muslim. I can't get my head around the fact, Nick, that someone is building a bomb next door to me and I haven't got a clue. There are no indicators at all. These people always, when they get to be, tend to have strong relationships with the local mosques, with the local imam.
Well, that's interesting in this case. Of course, he'd stopped attending mosque.
But he didn't turn into a terrorist overnight.
No, of course he didn't.
They've got to be conversations with the imam and people around him, which would not have been right and which should have been picked up, reported to the police.
Okay. And acted upon. Nida, thank you. We must move on. Coming up after the news.
Troops are going to be here at Buckingham Palace from today. I'm Theo Usherwood, asking tourists whether it makes them feel any safer.
Theo Usherwood outside Buckingham Palace, which the last time I looked has always got two soldiers standing there with guns anyway. So I wouldn't suggest that they're under much threat inside the palace. So how are the tourists reacting outside? We'll have a report on that. 9:30.
No, obviously, confusion or indeed much wondering about what we'll be talking about today in general terms. But what we talk about in rather more specific terms, where we try and direct the conversation, is at a time like this as much up to you as it is up to me. I'm drawn to a few issues today. You can possibly file them all under the letter I. Immigration, obviously, intelligence. Internment is a word that's popping up in some surprisingly mainstream places. Ordinarily, whenever anybody employs the word internment, they choose not to describe the facilities where people are interned as concentration camps, which is, of course, where that phrase comes from, but evidence, perhaps yet more evidence of how myopic and opaque so much of these debates are becoming, where nobody really says what they really mean. Except, of course, the people who are vile. They say what they really mean. I think we should round up all Pakistanis and shoot them, for example, you'll find on social media without digging too deeply. And that creates a problem in terms of what you do with people who really do pose a threat to us. So if you're going to use social media, for example, as grounds on which to stick someone on a suspect list, you've got to stick that racist fella on there as well, even though we all recognise that he, 99.9% recurring, doesn't have any intention whatsoever of going out and hurting someone just because they're brown. He's trying to be the big man on social media. In Germany, I think they've probably got it right. After the last attack in Berlin, which of course was committed by a man who was known to the authorities, I could be wrong on this. I think one thing I've learnt since the referendum result is what an appalling understanding we have of continental European politics and news, because so much of the news we receive here comes through the lens of vested interest. It's either the usual suspects trying to claim that everybody in Germany is furious and they all hate Angela Merkel and they're all furious about the refugee crisis, and then we don't hear much about the fact that her approval ratings are absolutely through the roof at the moment. So I'm not always 100% sure on my own sources when I talk about things that have happened in Germany. So I put that up there as a sort of as an early warning. But I think they tagged everyone on their watch list, and whether it works or not, I don't know, but it would probably make most of us feel a little bit better. The criteria, though, for being a suspicious character, that I think is the problem. And that, I think, is where we'll start today, shall we? What is the criteria for being a suspicious character, for being somebody that we should be keeping a closer eye on? We hear a lot, and I think we'll probably talk later in the programme about what on earth integration is supposed to mean. This monster responsible, no, this evil loser responsible for the attack in Manchester on Monday night was a university dropout who, according to most newspaper reports, they always love this detail, don't they? He smoked a lot of weed, which suggests in many ways he was incredibly integrated. He went to college in Salford, he supported Manchester United, and he smoked cannabis like it was going out of fashion. That puts him in the category of many British youths in their early 20s. So, you know, if he was dressing in Middle Eastern garb, only ever hanging out with people that were dressed and believed similarly and couldn't speak English, then you could understand why integration plays a role in this debate. But he wasn't. So I don't. I do wonder, though, where we should put this line. I mean, you can't go on a website and get collared just for going on a website, even if it's a vile website that teaches you how to build your own bombs. That can't be enough to get you what? I use the word collared, okay? It's a slightly lazy slang term, but we all know what's meant by it. The Anarchist's Handbook, you remember that from the 60s? The guy that wrote the Anarchist's Handbook passed away recently, and I learned a lot about that reading his obituary. That essentially had bomb-making details in it, and it was an underground smash hit in the 60s and the 70s. A cult, if you will, following built up around a book that essentially taught people how to fight against the establishment, how to blow up things. You get it. I think, didn't it pop up in the conversations after Timothy McVeigh's atrocities in Oklahoma as well? I don't know how you police thought. I also know, oddly, as those words come out of my mouth, that policing thought is what IS want to do. Islamic State want to do. The values they absolutely hate the most are liberal values. And yet, in my own country, increasingly loud voices seem to think that the best way to fight against people who hate liberal values is to turn on liberal values. I can't quite see the sense in that, but, you know, as ever, as I said yesterday, I'm not going to hate anyone. Even the people trying to spread hate, I'm not going to hate. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to play. I'm going to try for as long as I can to rise above the fray. Do what Christians have been taught to do for 2,000 years. And I can't quite bring myself to turn the other cheek, because that seems to me to be a little bit destructive, if not suicidal. But I'm not going to hate anyone. I hate things that people do. I'll hate things that people say. I'm not going to hate anyone. Everyone is a son or a brother or a father or a mother or a sister or a daughter. Everybody. And that, to me, seems to be more important than anything they might have picked up in the course of their life. But in terms of feeling safer, what would make us actually feel safer is probably a question that admits rather different answers to what would make us be safer. And I think that is probably where the intelligent analysis has to go next. Tabloid newspapers will deal in what makes us feel safer. Broadsheet newspapers will try to deal in what would make us be safer. Somewhere between the two lies the truth. What would make us be safer, and what would make us feel safer? What would make us be safer, I honestly don't know. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Remember that some of the values that we hold dear, some of our actual cultural treasures, are things that we're now being told we should dismantle and throw away. It's how mad things become when terrorists succeed in the way that this clown succeeded on Monday night. They genuinely do succeed, because we start talking about chucking away the things that they hate, the values that they hate. Managed in this country in recent years to turn liberal into a dirty word in some corners of the media. Liberal is a dirty word. It's nowhere dirtier than in the heartlands of Islamic State, but in some British newspapers and on British websites, liberal has become a dirty word here too. So again, we find ourselves addressing this slightly contradictory notion that the best way to fight back against people who despise liberal values is to promote people within our own cultures and countries who despise liberal values too. It's weird. And there are gradations of hatred. You could say, I despise liberal values, but I wouldn't actually go out and kill a liberal. But that's how they all start. Everyone who does want to go out and kill in the name of opposing liberal values starts off just by hating liberal or Western or whatever you want to call it. So much in common sometimes, the people peddling hate. It's remarkable to reflect on how slow they are to realise it. So, what would make us be safer? 03456060973. And because we spend a lot of time together and we trust each other now, we'll do both. What would make us feel safer? What would make me feel safer? Tubes were quiet this morning, I'm told. People changing their behaviour. Mrs. O'Brien and I had a conversation when we got up today that I'm sure millions of other people across the country are having in their own homes about whether or not we're going to change some of our plans. I can't remember what the specific was, actually. We've got something in the diary that we're thinking about not doing. It will come to me in the course of this hour, and I'll share it with you. I had been invited, but there was a football game due to be played at Wembley. It was an England game called off after a terror attack in France. Forgive me for not having all this at my fingertips before I come on air. I think there was an England game called off at Wembley after one of the Parisian attacks or one of the French attacks that we've seen in recent months. And I'd been invited in one of the rare occasions where I'd accepted a corporate hospitality invitation. I was going to go along and watch it. And I was really torn because the intelligence then was a little like it is today when they said we expect other attacks. But I think the match got called off. Must have been England-France. Anyway, I digress slightly. The point is that all of us, however determined we are not to fall into the traps that have been set for us, not to do what our enemies want us to do, however committed we are to Western values of compassion and love and peace, there will be profound temptations to succumb, to change our ways, to actually change our plans, not go to places. But would that make you feel safe? I suppose it would. If you don't get on the trains, you don't leave your house, you feel safer? 03456060973. But in terms of what would make us be safer, this man, because you may not know this stopped attending mosque in Didsbury, a suburb of Manchester I know quite well. He stopped attending mosque because the imams gave too many sermons that condemned Islamic State. And so, when you turn on a radio station like LBC or you open a British newspaper, there'll be lots of commentary and commentators and contributors saying Muslims need to speak out more. They don't do enough in their own communities. But this bloke left mosque because his own, quotes, community, end quotes, was speaking out so roundly and so negatively about Islamic State. He stopped going to an anti-Islamic State mosque. So you could even argue that because they were speaking out in that mosque, this bloke's radicalisation accelerated. I don't know what else you could do. If I was running a mosque, I'd definitely be on the speak out against Islamic State school of thought, but it means that the dangerous, vulnerable young men, vulnerable to radicalisation, I don't mean vulnerable in a way that's designed to engender any empathy or sympathy. You're vulnerable to radicalisation. You're chased out of a mosque because the imam is giving sermons that condemn Islamic State. So that wouldn't make us be safer, having more mosques, all mosques, doing what the one in Didsbury does, as they generally do in this country. Then you have people that say we need more integration. I can tell you now, when Sadiq Khan sits in this studio and speaks, a lot of the time, and he's a politician, so it's never going to be all of the time, but a lot of the time he speaks sense. The tirade, the cavalcade, the avalanche of hatred that is directed at him is epic and immense. And yet you can't really, as a British Muslim, get much more integrated than getting yourself elected as a member of parliament and then as mayor of the capital city, can you? So integration, another one of those mealy-mouthed words that people issue when they're not really telling you the truth. They need to integrate. All right, he's been elected mayor of London. Oh, I still hate him. Okay, well, what else can he do? Integration seems to me to be a very movable set of goalposts. Soon as a British Muslim integrates in the way that he or she has been told to do, they move the goalposts even further. And then they tell you what you actually believe. Oh, well, if you're not in favour of terrorism and paedophilia, you're not a proper Muslim, because I've read the Quran on an EDL website and I really know what the scriptures say. Strange times. Strange times. Start with that, shall we? Feel safer, be safer. Is there an answer to both of those questions that works? I'm not at this point in proceedings sure that there is. It's 10:15. Phone lines are open. Very, very, very busy at the moment, but I promise you that we speak to as many people as we humanly can. 03456 060 973 is the number that you need to get involved. It's 10:15. It's a really emblematic story, this one, the story of the Manchester bomber, because so many of the things that are offered up as solutions to the problems of radical Islam seem to have been observed in this case. His brother was reported to counter-terrorism officers by members of the Muslim community. The mosque at which he worshipped, he left because it was too anti-Islamic state. All of these things that we think would make us safer, we think would make us feel safer, seem to apply in this case. That's what I find fascinating this morning. The other thing I wanted to do, and I completely forgot this before coming on air, I don't know quite how this works, and I don't know whether it's going to make me sound ridiculous or irresponsible or both, but presumably there are people listening to this programme at the moment that are tempted by, sympathetic to, or amenable to the kind of rhetoric that this evil loser fell for. And I would like you to call me and talk to me. Or if you have a family member in this position, because it seems to me that beyond the sound bites, we actually need tactics. And tactics would include, well, you're worried about your cousin, but you don't know who to go to. Or you're worried about your cousin and you don't know who to tell. You're worried about your cousin, but your uncle will call you. Do you see what I mean? The more light we can shine on these issues, the more likely we are to come up with meaningful responses. When I first started doing this job, not long after the September the 11th attacks, I used to take a lot of calls from young Muslims who would always preface their comments with, of course I condemn the atrocities, and then there'd be a but. And I used to get very, very cross with the but. I used to shout at people. Believe it or not, I used to shout on the radio. I said, there is no but. You condemn the atrocity, pal. There's no but. And the but would usually involve British foreign policy or British intervention in the Middle East. And while I'm not here to defend British foreign policy blindly or British intervention in the Middle East, it can never be used in the same sentence as a terror attack upon, in this case, for example, innocent children. They're chalk and cheese. They're apples and oranges. You can, by all means, criticise British foreign policy in the Middle East, but there is never, ever a leap that you can make logically from doing that to blowing up children. So what would make us safer? I've got a fairly grim feeling. The answer is nothing. What would make us feel safer? Well, within the bounds, perhaps, of common decency and Western values, maybe there are some answers to that question. Let's find out. Sorry, I've gone on a little this morning, but, you know, there's a lot going on. Andy's in Brentwood. Andy, what would make you feel safer?
Interning them. I'm not on about the whole of the Muslim community, because the whole of the Muslim community are not committing these problems.
Yes.
You just said a moment ago that they were giving information to the authorities. Based on the information given to the authorities are lackless. They seem to come out with we'll stand up against this and stand up against that, and I'll do a Diane routine every time something goes. This repulsive creep was already on the radar. Now, I'm not saying you can stop every one of them, but the problem we've got in this country is we're becoming weak. And I'm not getting anything against the Muslim community. I've got it against...
All right, just give me the words then that you think people should be... Hang on, Andy, and hang on. The words you think people should be locked up without trial for saying.
Right. You just stated a few moments ago that this gentleman had been put on the radar.
Yes, but I don't know why. So I mean, internment, internment is concentration camp. So you think people should be locked up without trial for saying things. I just want to know what would be on the list.
No. Part of the list is, for example, the ones that have recently been standing out in the street screaming and hollering anti-Western views.
So give me the words that you should be locked up without trial for saying.
What am I saying?
I don't like the West.
No.
What then?
What I'm saying is that they don't mind the West when we're bailing them out and giving them money or feeding them and clothing them in their house.
I'm going to insist that you answer the questions that I ask, because I like the examination of internment as a meaningful proposal, and I respect you enough to examine it properly. So what words should people be locked up without trial for saying?
I believe, not so much words, I believe, like we have it on the internet.
You just said shouting in the street was the first starting point. So what are they shouting that you think should get them locked up without trial?
Right, if they're monitoring these people over a long period of time, and they're coming out with reviews which are obviously a problem. And
yeah, what though? If it's obviously a problem, you can tell me what they are.
Yeah, kill the non-believers and so forth, and this sort of stuff.
But you just said that.
You've got to monitor them.
You just said those words.
No, I'm saying that these people are coming out with certain views that are repulsive.
So what views should we be locking people up for? As opposed to action.
You mean as in locking and throwing away the key? I mean, you should be putting...
Well, that's what internment means, Andy, locking people up without trial. So
not literally to the point you leave them in the jail for 6 months. I'm saying...
Okay, mate. You don't know, do you? That's fine. That's not a criticism, because I don't know either. But you've got no idea what words we should lock people up without trial for saying out loud.
What is the idea? We see more people...
And do we lock them up just for thinking them and not saying them out loud?
No, you don't. But if you've got a list as long as your arm of problems...
Well, you can't give me one, mate. Just calm down a little bit. Everyone's tempers are high. Everyone's emotional. Everyone's angry, actually. But if you're going to lock people up without trial just for saying stuff, we've got to be really clear on what that's.
I agree with you, and I'm not saying it flippantly.
So what stuff should it be then?
I'm saying if they've got an history.
No.
You see where I'm coming from this? When they're using
I know exactly where you're coming from, Andy. I don't think you've got a clue where you're going, my friend. That's the problem. So what words do you want to lock up British citizens for saying without trial?
James, can I ask you one question?
No, only when you answer mine. Only when you answer mine.
Right, obviously, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not literally saying someone who's saying an mouth of Andy and the West should be chucked in jail immediately.
You have literally said that, Andy, in the last 4 minutes.
If they've got an history of the problem.
Yeah, so what words should we be locking people up without trial for saying out loud? What words? Tell me the words.
Well, words like, for example, like that, they want to kill the non-believers and so forth.
But I see on Facebook all the time people saying that they want to kill Muslims, so we have to lock them up as well.
No, I'd lock them up as well. I'd lock the BNP.
So we're locking up everybody who writes on social media that they want to kill someone else.
I'll put it this way: no one has the right. The BNP are the same. They should be treated the same. I'm on equal pair with them. Anyone who comes out with these sort of views in regards to either side should be dealt with, and they're not being dealt with accordingly.
No, I understand your frustration, and you perhaps now understand mine, in that it's very easy to say internment, but you haven't got a clue who we should be interning.
There's certain individuals on both sides of the fence here that should not be walking the streets. And they've got information
but you can't tell me who they are.
Right-wingers or extremists. We should not have to put these in our communities.
But you can put them on trial for inciting racial hatred. You can put them on trial for, terror offences, planning or conspiracy to commit. When you start locking people up without trial for things that they've said out loud, I don't see how that's ever going to end well. I really don't. But I'm not here to like I've said, I'm not here to have fights or hate on or get cross with anybody. I'm just here to shine light. And if you shine light at the internment suggestion, Andy, at this point in proceedings, it doesn't seem to illuminate much, does it? Because we feel that something should be done. But if you're going to lock up that Muslim bloke there for saying that he wants to kill infidels, you've got to lock up that infidel over there for saying that he wants to kill Muslims. And if you just glance at social media and Facebook, well, I mean, there aren't enough prisons on the planet to lock up everybody who's expressed an ambition or a thought like that. And you said you wanted to ask me a question. What was that?
Well, as far as I can see, when what we're talking about, they're committing treason in my eyes.
Yeah, OK. It's 28 minutes after 10. Gary is in Glasgow. Gary, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Hello, Gary.
There's a lot of navel gazing, and I've done a lot of soul searching to think of solutions. And one of the things that I came up with was, it worries me that I don't want to...
Quite short of time. Apologies. I spoke to Andy for a long time, so if you've got a point to make, let's move to it quickly.
Yeah, OK. Segregating children on the basis of their parents' superstitions into separate schools is one of the moves that I don't like to see.
So getting rid of faith schools might help. I don't think... Did this chap go to a faith school? I doubt it if he's in Didsbury. He might have done. I think he went to William Hume and Stretford Grammar School, didn't he? Manchester Claremont Primary School, Burnage Academy, William Hume and Stretford Grammar School.
And the killers of Lee Rigby were devout Catholics. We're finding a lot of the parents are very devout, and what they do is they tend to go to another extreme religion. One of the killers, I think in America, I can't remember the name.
All right. No, again, we can put faith schools on the list of things that might make us feel safer. I'm uncomfortable with it because much to my own surprise, since I lost my father and since my children were born, I've derived enormous comfort from my Christian education and the sort of tools it's given me to exercise compassion and other things. But maybe that's a price worth paying to stop other people going down a corrupt path.
James, when I was at school, when I was at college, I did English literature. I criticised. It was called critical appreciation. You didn't take a book at its cover. You had to criticise it and read it. We're not doing that in schools with religion. We're tiptoeing round religion.
I'm not sure you're right. I mean, the A-level I did in religious studies, the A-level 25 years ago, was very much about comparative religions. But in some faith schools, you're right. Perhaps the narrative goes unchallenged. Problem is that is going to cause upset among Jewish and Christian communities who would argue that they haven't sort of borne any responsibility whatsoever for terrorist atrocities. Your point notwithstanding about a devout background in one faith perhaps lends itself to an extremist shift to another faith. 10:30 is the time. Questions are simple. Answers, it would seem, far from it. We're just, because I think somebody has to, pointing out the difference between things that would make us feel safer, briefly, or things that we think would make us feel safer, and things that actually would make us safer. And I guess the two most obvious starting points are two words that have entered into the debate: internment and integration. Internment, as Andy just demonstrated, first caller this morning, is a very tempting thing to reach for. It would make us feel safer if we could lock up anybody who poses us a potential threat. But it doesn't work. Imprisoning people without trial in concentration camps for saying stuff, that's not the British way. It never will be, please God. Integration? Okay, I know what that word means. I don't understand how, under any understanding of that word, Sadiq Khan couldn't be described as the most integrated Muslim in Britain. Doesn't stop him being on the receiving end of all sorts of racial hatred and Islamophobia. So I'm not sure everybody using the word integration is necessarily being straight up either. I think Gwen in Wales is, in Selsdon, I beg your pardon, she's picking up on the most important issue of the day. She says, James, please stop using this ridiculous wording, hate on. We never used to use silly words like this. Gwen, my apologies. 10:35 is the time. Iman is in Hampstead. Iman, what would you like to say?
Yes, hi, good morning, James.
Hello.
I apologise if I'm a bit nervous. I've never called into a live radio show before.
No, don't worry, we're not live. This is all it's all pre-recorded.
Okay, great. So with regards to things that would make me personally feel safe,
yes,
as a Muslim British citizen of Egyptian origin,
yes,
who I consider myself a moderate Muslim. I abide by Islam 1.0.
Yes.
So I don't have a dress code. I have an ethics code. And I don't see myself as any different from any of my Christian colleagues or friends. In fact, I did actually attend a Christian Catholic school run by nuns back in Egypt.
Okay.
all through primary school.
So you've hedged your bets. You've hedged your bets when it comes to the afterlife.
Yeah, so basically, I'm actually very upset and very emotional since the Manchester event. I have children of my own, and to be honest, I'm feeling quite unsafe. I was supposed to be taking my daughter actually on Friday to the Ariana Grande's gig in O2.
Very, very close to home.
With a friend of hers and her mum, who's a friend of mine, and I'm really struggling, to be honest, with the messaging. Because she's 11 years old, and this should have been her first concert. And I'm really struggling with the messaging because obviously, because we're Muslim, like as I said, we're quite moderate.
Yes.
We abide by the ethical code, but you wouldn't tell us apart from any
I understand.
human being walking down the street. I always talk about the ethics of human beings in general, to be honest.
The commonalities of faiths and the commonalities of people. So I hesitate to nudge you along, but there's so many people waiting. The things in terms of what would make you feel or be safer.
I'm very angry, to be honest, at the fact that the British government is allowing returning ISIS fighters to come back into the community without facing any trials. As far as I'm concerned, they should be apprehended and charged with treason.
Well, I don't know if treason is the thing to charge them with, but they're certainly criminals. It's a prescribed organisation. It is illegal to join it, to take up arms for it, anything like that. It seems to me strange that we're not doing that. I wonder how big that problem is, though. It plays well in the media, but do you really think there are lots and lots of people who've been to fight in Syria and we know who they are and we leave them to it? I mean, I'd happily lock them up.
Well, I'm struggling to understand the rhetoric.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's the problem.
I don't understand, and I disagree with you, and I never do actually, James. Slightly, I honestly believe it's treason. So when I took the oath when I was naturalized into a British citizen,
yes,
I've signed up for the British values and the British way of life. So anything that does not go with that is treason against your chosen country of domicile.
Not in terms of what you think and say. Otherwise, you'd have to start putting people in prison if they took to social media to call for a Holocaust or a final solution. You can't lock people up just for words.
I get what you're saying. I find it despicable and disgusting, to be honest, when I see things like that, such on social media. And my children are growing up, and I'm constantly banging on, if you see anything that goes against,
extremists. That's the problem Andy had, is identifying when an extremist's words should constitute a crime. They're usually quite clever. The sort of Amjad Chowdhuries of this world know exactly what they're doing.
Any human being with to be honest, if they're good at heart, would identify anything vile that comes across. We all do that. We ignore it because we're being taught political correctness. But we know it. You feel uncomfortable.
But then the people who decry political correctness are often the people who come out with the vilest things. It's a very circular position. But I think we can all agree if it's proven, and it has to be done in court. That's the other thing we need to recognise is the rule of law. If you've been to fight for Islamic State and it's proven in court, you're going to prison.
I understand that, but to be honest, it's quite tricky with those vile people going on social media with a hatred pitch. But it's very straightforward for somebody who's taken the steps from kind of being interested, or as you were saying earlier, finding themselves a bit compassionate with whatever ISIS stands for. And the rest of it into and then they make the next move into adopting the ideology.
It's just identifying what the next move is, because words are relatively cheap. Actions, of course, are incredibly costly. Iman, thank you. I guess that maybe to conflate the first three calls today, if you're uncomfortable with the idea of internment, as I am, because it is the process which creates concentration camps. It is the polar opposite of innocent until proven guilty. It's locking people up without trial. Maybe the reason why we're not locking up people returning from Syria is because proving it in court would be so difficult. And again, listen to this now. That creaking sound you can hear is the sound of a liberal value under strain. That's a liberal value creaking under the strain of this terrorism. Because I could say to you now something I would not have said to you at various points in the past, which is I could probably live with the security services locking people up because they say they've returned from fighting for ISIS in Syria. You can't prove it in court because we haven't got witnesses, we haven't got an evidence trail, we haven't got means, motive and opportunity in court. But if MI5 say this bloke's just come back from Basra, I could probably live with locking him up, and then automatically I've gone down the road that I encourage others not to go down, which is being sort of in favour of imprisonment without trial. And there goes another one of our values. And then, of course, the argument is we're allowing our culture to be debased. We don't defend our culture much. We don't defend our culture enough. I keep hearing that. I never know what it means. Our culture's under threat. There is no bigger threat to Western values than imprisonment without trial. There is no more violent opposite to Western values than locking people up without trial. So our culture's under threat, so we need to abandon one of the foundation stones of our culture. You see what I mean about how tricky things get when you start shining lights? Elizabeth's in West Drayton. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I don't expect you to agree with me, but I have the solution, I think. And what would make me feel safer is for citizenship to be stripped from a person like that who commits an atrocity like that from their families.
Oh, okay.
And for them to be deported.
Where
and
to?
I'll tell you why, because I think that they need to be to the country of origin. I think they need to be offered disincentives which will make them think twice. They don't care about us.
You're imputing a sort of rational process to them, and you are, of course, also endorsing the quite severe punishment of people who haven't committed any crimes at all. So the question you need to answer is, do you want to live in a country where you can be punished for a crime you haven't committed?
Well, James, unfortunately...
That's a yes or no question.
We've got a radical problem and we need a radical solution to it.
Yes, those are great words, but neither of them are yes or no. So do you want to live in a country where you can be punished when you haven't done anything wrong?
Well, I think.
Elizabeth, it's not a trick question. You have to say yes. I'll respect that. You have to say yes, though, because you already have.
Yes, I'm going to say yes.
Yes, there you go. And that's bye-bye Western values.
I would look after my children. I would know what they're doing, and maybe it would encourage their families.
Yeah, but what about your nephew? What about your nephew? What about your second cousin once removed? He does something bad, mate. You're going to jail. Bye-bye Western values.
Like that.
Bye-bye Western values. Bye-bye.
No, it wouldn't get to that stage.
Of course it would. You just said you want to live in a country where you could get locked up or deported despite the fact that you haven't committed a crime. There's a word for that. Do you know what it is, Elizabeth?
Well, do you know what?
Sharia law. Elizabeth wants Sharia law, and that means they've won. So you want to live in a society where you can get locked up for thinking the wrong things, for not having done anything wrong, for being related to somebody that's committed a crime. You want to live under Sharia law. Elizabeth, did you realise that before you rang in?
Why are you trying to talk over me all the time?
I'm not. I'm just telling you.
No, you are. Like you always do.
Here we go.
Mostly agree with anything that you say.
There's nothing to disagree about. We agree with each other, Elizabeth.
If one family suffered that solution, that they were deported and had their citizenship withdrawn, maybe it would save hundreds of other people.
Yeah. But we agree. I'm not arguing with you. You want to live in a country where you can get locked up and punished despite not having committed a crime. I don't, because I believe in Western values. You don't. That's cool. I'm not talking over you. I'm just shining a light. It's 10:45. I always hold back from commenting on matters linked to the Middle East and Israel in particular until I've checked my facts. So while I was talking to Elizabeth, it popped into my head that often suicide bombers in Israel, Palestinian terrorists in Israel, have punishment visited upon their whole family, which she suggested we should start doing here, and I've double-checked. You do, I think, routinely see the homes of suicide bombers, the family homes of suicide bombers, are being bulldozed, and it doesn't appear to have stemmed the tide of terrorism in that part of the world. So in terms of the list of things that would make us feel or be safer today, because somebody has to, we're having a proper look at them. We're not just allowing these comments, comforting comments. That's the point you have to remember. That's why I tried my very best not to hate on people coming out with things I find hateful, because it's comforting to think that there are simple solutions to complicated problems. It's a very lucrative business to be in, peddling that sort of snake oil. But internment, we kind of recognise that is A, the process by which people get put in concentration camps, and B, it is a practice of imprisonment without trial, and C, I beg your pardon, it brings us very close to thought crimes. What are we actually going to lock people up simply for saying? All of those, whether you like it or not, you have to concede, all of those are very precious Western liberal values. So it seems to me a little bit odd to argue that we should fight against people who hate our values by abandoning our values. And I don't mean necessarily tolerance and compassion and abstract words that some people are becoming a bit impatient with. I mean the rule of law. I mean the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. I mean trial by jury. I mean the fact that you can't be locked up, although of course the Northern Ireland issue proves that you can, but in principle you shouldn't be locked up without trial. Do we want concentration camps? Innocent people potentially put in them. Some people will say yes, but a lot of people who think they want them will not say yes when they realise what it means. And then you've got the idea of punishing the whole family of a terrorist for the atrocity committed by a terrorist, which again means that you could be punished for being completely innocent. You have absolutely no agency, knowledge or control over what anybody in your family does. If they do something awful, you could get jailed for it. So again, you've got to remember that we're talking about laws that will apply to every human being in a country, not laws that will apply exclusively to Jews or Christians or Muslims or Capricorns or Sagittarians or Pisceans. These laws will apply equally to everybody. So by all means, tell me that you want to live in a country where you could get locked up despite it being absolutely proven that you haven't committed any crimes. Proven that you haven't committed any crimes. But let's not pretend that anyone with a brain in their head is going to sign up for a country like that. What was the other one? What was the second one? Locking up people who've been to Syria. That's the most interesting so far. You've been to Syria to fight for Islamic State. You don't deserve to be allowed back into this country. But you've got to prove it. That's where the rule of law gets really sticky. That's why fascists hate the rule of law. And you can, even as a sort of fully paid up member of the liberal establishment, that I can see why that's tempting. All right, we don't have to prove it. You lower the burden of proof. If you've been in Syria, it's a bit like the Guantanamo Bay school of thought. Say, there's no evidence at all this bloke was a terrorist. Yeah, but look at the geography. Look where he was. Are you going to lock someone up for geography now? I could probably, in the immediate aftermath of Monday night's attack, I could probably live with that. But a month from now, I'd find it repellent again. That's what happens. We've all got pendulums, moral pendulums inside us that swing. It's what terrorists do. They push our pendulums. So right now, you tell me we're going to lock that bloke up because we're pretty sure he's been to Syria. Obviously, we can't prove it because we haven't got CCTV. But MI5 are confident he was there. That's good enough for me at 10:53. Less than 48 hours after a terror attack on little children in Manchester. A month from now, when you ask me the question, should we be locking people up without trial, without proof, without evidence, just on the say-so of the authorities and the security services? A month from now, I'll be screaming blue bloody murder that we shouldn't. But that's how terrorism works. It lowers our guards, it lessens our resolve, it dilutes our values. And so complete is that process that many people, intelligent, decent people, will argue that the best way to fight back against people who despise our values is to abandon our values. Layla is in Green Park. Layla, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hi, Layla.
I just wanted to say that, this morning when I was dropping my son off to school, we heard, about the army being deployed. And my son, who's 9 years old, after a little while, he says, "Oh, Mummy, I'm really scared." And I said, "Well, why?" And he says, "Well, because, they're sending the army to, Buckingham Palace and to embassies." And he said that he feels that people that are these are people that are more deserving. They're more special than we are.
Oh, gosh.
To be protected. And I completely see where he's coming from. I do feel that there's... I just don't understand why they are being deployed in those sorts of areas.
Because they're targets, Layla, that's all.
Of course they're targets. But what I'm saying is...
It's not a judgment of the value, the fundamental value of the people inside these buildings. It's a judgment on where an attack is most likely to occur. I think you need to explain that to your son. It's not difficult.
No, of course. But what I'm saying is... and what I understood from what he was trying to say is that with places that are heavily populated, it would feel much more comforting to see some security presence or heightened, shall I say. So, like in central London, in shopping centres, that kind of thing.
Then we move close to martial law with armed troops on every street corner. And remember, these guys are suicide attackers. So although it's not a political move to put 5,000 troops on the streets of Britain, it's advice that comes from the Joint Terrorism Action Committee and the Security Services, advice given to the Prime Minister that he or she then acts upon. It's a suicide attack that we're talking about. So, the question of shooting him before he can detonate himself is grisly and a little bit absurd.
Yeah. I was just saying that it would make... I feel that it would make me feel a bit safer.
To see more and more troops on our streets.
Well, not everywhere, but like I said, the heavily populated areas. Yeah. Because I've got to say that I do avoid those places, especially when, on the weekends or...
And the terror threat is high. How old is your son? How old is he?
He's 9.
Okay, I only check on that because my eldest was 9 when we went to Paris on the Eurostar and we saw quite heavily armed police, actually, rather than military, but not a sight you're used to seeing in leafy suburbia. But we saw quite heavily armed police at Gare du Nord station as soon as we got off the train, and she found that quite frightening. So it swings and roundabouts.
I think everyone's quite different, because my son's quite fascinated, to be honest. I feel like he feels that we're safe. If I don't know. I just, like I said, it depends really on.
I think the problem is that we nudge towards, and every call in a way has intentionally or unintentionally nudged us ever closer to this conclusion, is that the more freedom that we enjoy, the more risk we are exposed to, and that is the trade-off that societies make, is how much freedom are you prepared to sacrifice in the hope of reducing risk? Answer, well, for me at least, you'd have to prove the reduction in risk before I even contemplated the surrendering of my culture, my values, my country. David in Manchester, speaking of country, he is persuaded that white British Christian patriots are already criminalised. Well, mate, I'm all of those things. I'm white, I'm British, I'm Christian, I'm patriotic. I don't feel in any way criminalised. You're going to have to give me more detail about what it is that you think you hold in your heart that is in some way unacceptable to broader society. I'm going to carry on with this. It's important, isn't it? And thank you, everyone who's getting in touch, having noticed that we're the only place that's doing it. I understand, this is the point about empathy and compassion. I understand why these simplistic sound bites can be comforting. Lock them up. Throw away the key. It's why we use the shorthand of the Hang'em and Flogg'em Brigade. These Hang'em and Flogg'em Brigade, another example of where Sharia law is actually being called for by people who claim that they hate it. But that's the point. You have to shine a light on it. Otherwise, we really will start surrendering what is precious to us. We really will start surrendering our values. I'm not lighting candles. I'm not holding a vigil. I'm not changing my Facebook profile in a naive and slightly stupid belief that it's going to change the course of history. I'm pointing out that if we change the fabric of our nation, if we change the things that we hold dear, then yes, platitudinally speaking, we're doing what the terrorists want. But more importantly than that, we're diminishing the quality of our own life. We are despoiling our own country. We are abandoning our culture and our values. You look at jurisprudence. You look at the evolution of British law. Imprisonment without trial is absolutely to be rejected, and trial by jury is absolutely to be welcomed. But because of this terrorist, we're already questioning those truths. And hello again. If you were listening an hour ago, I'd just clarify something. You probably don't care. You possibly weren't listening, but it wasn't. I said there was an England football game that was happening shortly after one of the attacks in France, and I thought it had been called off. I got that completely wrong. I said I'd had a corporate hospitality invitation to attend an England game, and I was weighing up whether or not I was going to go, whether I was going to allow that terror attack to alter my behaviour. The game went ahead. My corporate hospitality host called off their event, so the decision was taken out of my hands. I've just remembered the details because a few of you have just reminded me that the game did go ahead after all. So we're doing something that's a bit horrible. It's a little bit shoot the messenger as well from my point of view. An awful lot of people hate having their sort of comforting but ultimately bogus thoughts pulled apart in the cold light of day. It's horrible to see that what you thought was either a good idea or a comforting idea is absolutely bonkers. But we live in a world now where most of the media is full of people peddling comforting but bogus ideas. So someone's got to make a stand against it. And the stand we're making against it today is drawing the distinction between stuff that we think might make us feel better and stuff that actually would make us be safer. For example, some people would think they would feel safer if we started bulldozing the houses of suicide bombers, as they do as Israelis do in Palestine. But of course, that means you've got to recognise the differences between our society and those two societies. That means you are in favour of living in a country where you can be punished even though you haven't committed any crime. Which means, oddly, if you ring me up to argue that we should be punishing or deporting or imprisoning the families of suicide bombers, you're kind of in favour of Sharia law type justice, which no doubt is going to come as a very unpleasant surprise to you. But again, I'd urge you not to get too cross with the messenger. Focus on the message. That's what we always try to do on this programme these days. Sarah gets it. She's She's emailed me to say, why are you being so rational about what we could do to make ourselves safer? This is not a time for being rational, O'Brien. This is a time for knee-jerk reactions and hatred. I have no idea what could make us safer right now. No one can do anything to stop a lunatic from randomly attacking anyone anywhere. It is literally impossible. Surely that is the problem. That is what the problem is here. I don't feel any less safe than I did before the Manchester attack. I do, Sarah. You're tougher than me. I was supposed to go to the O2 tomorrow with my 9-year-old, and we will still go if it's not cancelled. I also understand why everyone would not take their little girl to that concert now, but to me, that is giving them exactly what they want. We, the non-terrorising people of the world, are being punished for doing nothing wrong. They don't need to lock us up without trial. They are taking away our liberty by stopping us doing what we would and should have been doing. You can't stop someone else being bad by changing your own behaviour. I'd add to that no terrorist atrocity can take away our freedoms. No terrorists. They could bomb 1,000 concert halls. They don't take away our freedoms by doing that. Only we get to decide whether our freedoms are taken away. And you can understand why it's tempting to think that you want your freedoms taken away until somebody asks one or two pertinent and hopefully intelligent questions. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. Khalil is in Red Hill. Khalil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, first of all, I wanted to make clear that from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community's perspective, we absolutely condemn this barbaric attack, and it's important to make that point. But on the very important question that you make about whether we should be holding people without trial, I don't think that we should be holding people without trial, but we do need to think very carefully about how our judicial system assesses both the evidence and also the burden of proof. And I know that you mentioned earlier on the burden of proof when dealing with these things. And I'll explain why.
We're talking, you're being a bit opaque. Are we talking specifically about people returning from Syria, returning from IS?
Yes, people returning from IS and also those that are involved in conspiracy or attempt to commit acts of terror. But just on your initial point, because that's what you're talking about, you know, the burden of proof, which is beyond a reasonable doubt, has worked really well for us for hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's predominantly designed for offences that are committed in this country where you can, where the jurisdiction is here, where you can get the evidence and put people on trial.
And we can derive comfort from the legal systems of other countries tackling most crimes, but what's unique about Islamic State, of course, is that it's not a country with a legal system that we would recognise in any way, shape or form.
Quite right. So there's no extradition, there's no way of cooperating with them in order to get evidence. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. So you're quite right to make that point. And I think that the big difficulty that we have here is because the offence is committed outside of jurisdiction, trying to meet that burden of proof of beyond a reasonable doubt is extremely difficult. And so the question is, in my view, not that we should begin to intern people or put them imprison them, without trial, but that we should assess what the burden of proof is and maybe reduce that from beyond a reasonable doubt to perhaps a little bit beyond a balance of probability, but also in particular...
But this is, thin end of the wedge type stuff, isn't it? And I've admitted that right now I'm susceptible to what you're saying, but I know that a month from now I'll recognise the dangers of it. It's that creeping. So today we'll just dilute the burden of proof in this context for these people in this crime. Tomorrow it very rarely is going to get undiluted.
Can I add to that?
Of course, mate. Of course.
James, and that is that we also need to have trials that are transparent, and that's a really important part of this. Because whilst you might, from a legal perspective, have differences in burdens of proof and the evidence that's admitted, what's really important is that you have transparent trials that are open to the public. People can see both of the security services taking steps, and those that wish to change our way of life can also see that we will take steps within the bounds of decency and reasonableness and the freedom.
Like what? I need more detail. I'm just getting the words. I'm not getting the actions. What does this look like? Give me an example.
What that means is that, you shouldn't have secret trials. And I do appreciate that
they have secret trials usually for intelligence reasons.
That's right, and that's why I think we should look at the burden of proof and look at what evidence is admissible. So, for example, a lot of evidence can be obtained from information on social media that is currently encrypted, and then maybe a suggestion.
I see. So Snooper's Charter type territory.
Well, I mean, not quite that, but look, I mean, there is so much communication that is encrypted, and people are using communication, encrypted communication.
And so you're questioning. Okay, no, I understand you. So what's permissible in court is determined by how that information was gathered. And the problem is, again, though, Khalil, and I don't want to sound like a stuck record, is I can nod along with this at this point in my life and at this point in British history, but if you were to come up with another example, if we were to swap roles and I'd rung you and you were the presenter asking awkward, difficult questions, you'd just come up with another example where we could be diluting the permissibility of evidence. How are you going to collect the evidence? You take away my privacy, you take away my rights.
Well, I mean, rights are important, but everybody has rights. And remember...
Well, nobody has rights eventually in your world because you're chipping away at them.
Well, no, we all have rights, but we have rights within a framework of rules. That's the point. And I think that is a really important question, because we talk about rights in isolation of responsibilities. And when you have a responsibility in connection with those rights, that's when a right becomes really valuable. What you can't have is a right that is absolute, an absolute right to freedom of speech, regardless of the harm.
No, we don't have that, although it seems we're possibly edging ever closer to it in some quarters. But we don't have an absolute right to freedom of speech. The classic example is shouting fire or bomb in a crowded cinema, or incitement to racial hatred. Those will be words. So yeah, okay. So you would dilute the absolutism of some evidence criteria.
Right, and I reiterate, keep the judicial system transparent. You know,
I'm putting you on the list. Unfortunately, you make some sense, but that's never going to make a very good headline or a cushy slogan for a far right fanatic.
That's the part I'm not good at.
You know, lock them up and throw away the key, intern them, deport them, ban their families, bulldoze their houses. Those are the things that in Britain at this point in our history we seem to be drawn to. The bovine, simplistic, two-dimensional answers to the question, which I derive some grim pleasure from dismantling. But your rather more sophisticated answer troubles me on a sort of philosophical level. The idea that we should make our legal system less committed to protecting civilians from the state. But at this point in history, as I said, I can see why many people would nod along with it. Khalil, thank you. Remember, as I bid farewell to Khalil, it frees up a phone line for you. We're coming at various questions from various angles today, but really we're just somewhat reluctantly, because I completely understand the comfort that we can derive from finding a nice hook to hang our hat on without spending too much time wondering about the security or the safety of that hook. I would feel safer if we locked them all up. I would feel safer if we deported. I would feel safer. But the more you look at these seductive sound bites and slogans, the more bogus they become. I quite like the German model of this figure of 3,000 people known to the authorities. Obviously, we need to know a little bit more about what it is they've done to become known to the authorities. But certainly tagging people proven to have certain associations, certain links, seems to me palatable, if not perfect. I could go down that road. The internment road is probably the one that the more extreme ends of the argument are going to be coalescing around. It's important to remember that is a call for concentration camps in Britain. It's very important to remember that. You can still be in favour of it. I respect that, because I believe in British values. As in, I respect your right to hold that view, but let's not kid ourselves about what it is we're endorsing. Somebody calls for internment, whether they're writing for the Daily Telegraph or whether they're standing up in the terraces at a football game surrounded by other skinheads. If they start calling for internment, they are calling for concentration camps to be built on British soil, wherein British citizens can be locked up with no trial and no proof that they've ever done anything wrong. To which a significant swathe of people in this country will now shout, I don't care if they're Muslims, that's fine. And that's where you also have to point out that if you can do it to Muslims today, you can do it to somebody else tomorrow. And that is baby steps towards fascism. It's Martin Niemöller, isn't it? First they came for the innocent Muslims. First they came for the guilty Muslims. No one's got a problem with that. Game over. Book closed. First they came for the innocent Muslims who hadn't done anything wrong. Well, once you're going for innocent people, locking them up, deporting them, punishing them, bulldozing their houses, once you're doing that, well, all bets are off, aren't they? For humanity, for human rights, for fairness, for equality, for Western values, for British values, for our culture. 11:15 is the time, where we're sort of arriving at the rather uncomfortable conclusion that there is very little or nothing that we can do to make ourselves safer, apart from completely abandon our own values and culture and pursue a sort of Sharia law style politics where you get punished and locked up for doing things that aren't crimes. You get punished according to, I don't know, almost the whim of the authorities. You could get punished because your cousin or your brother had done something wrong. You could get locked up without trial because last year you approved of internment when you thought it was only going to apply to people who are nothing like you. People who call for integration often seem to me, and I shouldn't judge everything by some of the chompier contributors to social media, but a lot of people who say they integrate, they need to. I've got this great thing at LBC, which I don't know, I've told you this before, but if you send me a message, I can see all the messages you've sent to the station recently. So anybody who uses the word integration, I click on and see what they had to say about Sadiq Khan last time he was here. Astonishing how many people who think Muslims need to integrate more think that getting elected a member of parliament and the mayor of the capital city of this country isn't someone who is integrated. Well, it would be funny, wouldn't it? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. I also have an open invitation out there, in the interest of shining light. Anybody tempted by the sort of rhetoric of Islamic State, anyone tempted by the radicalisation programme, I would love you to ring me so I can tell you just how wrong you are. So how categorically and completely wrong you are. But I'm not going to scream it in your face with little bits of spit landing on you. I'm going to employ the gifts God gave me to explain to you why you've been corrupted, why you've been misled, why you've been manipulated, and why you're being drawn to something vile and evil and wrong. But I can't obviously dedicate a whole show to that because there's a reasonable chance that my phone wouldn't ring at all. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. Aisha is in Manchester. Aisha, what would you like to say?
Hi, I don't want to make you angry, but there was a time where I was almost radicalised. As a Muslim, it was actually when two men were arrested without charge or trial, so they didn't have due process. That made me extremely angry, as it should do to everyone.
Yes.
But the radicalisation aspect came in when I saw Anjem Chowdhury actually speaking about it on YouTube. So, I felt like no one else was talking about it. And
talking about what? Because he was very, very, and obviously I have to be conscious of what the law is. He has now been convicted of crimes, but for many, many years he wasn't, and people didn't understand why. And the simple reason was that he was a trained lawyer, and he knew exactly where the lines are. Exactly. So, and there are lots of people like that. If for example, you got into trouble for libel on Twitter, your lawyers would have explained to you that if you post something vile and then delete it shortly afterwards, even though it then gets screenshot around the world, you're better insulated against accusations than you were if you left it up there. So people like Anjem Chowdhury and other extremists, they know exactly what they're doing.
Exactly. And it's so frustrating to normal Muslims because...
Yes. But why did you fall for it then? What was seductive about it?
Because obviously I was in a blind rage at the time. And
well, don't say obviously. What about the bombings in Iraq, or what were you in a blind rage about?
No, it was actually I was obsessed with these two cases. I was told not to mention the names.
Oh no, you can't mention names. But you knew people who were picked up without charge, or they were picked up by the security services because they were suspected of something that there wasn't evidence to prove.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I felt like when I say no one was talking about it, I felt like our mainstream scholars were not talking about it at the time.
Okay. Yes.
Enough, and that's the key really, because in order to make us safer, I mean, security services can't, arrest each possible lone wolf. We already know that. The only way that we can make ourselves safer is to prevent radicalisation.
Yes.
Now, I disagree with the prevent strategy.
Okay,
However,
why?
I do think it's really important to prevent radicalisation, especially being in the situation I was. And the way that I got out of it very quickly, because even when I saw that video of Anjem Chowdhury talking about it on YouTube,
yes,
I saw the way he was talking, and he didn't have any of the etiquette and manners of what I know an Islamic scholar or leader or theologian to talk like. So it was already clear to me that, and I very quickly saw that he was just this attention-seeking person who...
But how? I'm missing some steps in your journey. I think I understand why, if you had friends that you felt had been very, very unfairly treated by security services.
I didn't know them. They weren't friends.
Okay, but you felt a kinship with them. You felt some sort of fellowship with them, and that is, we're often told that's one step towards radicalisation. Look how they treat people like us. Look how they treat people like us. And similarly, I would point at far right websites and say, look what they think of us. If I was recruiting for Islamic State, I'd be all over some of the Facebook pages of Britain First. I say, this is what they think of us. This is what they think of us. We have to fight back. So those two things I understand. Then you end up on YouTube looking for somebody who reflects your slightly irrational, emotional position, and then you say, I very quickly realised it was bogus. How and why?
Okay, so while I was actually watching the video, he was in that particular video. He was talking really violently, and he was laughing about a policeman getting kicked in the...
Okay, I need to be a little bit careful legally, because I haven't... sorry, I'm asking you for details, and then I'm telling you that I'm not comfortable, because I haven't seen the video myself, so...
That's fine.
Just give me the broader description of what happened in your mind, rather than what you saw on the screen. You saw something that you knew wasn't true, for example. Don't tell me what it was.
Yes, and the way he was mocking and the language he was using, I could quickly see that this is not the language of... a Muslim theologian, a Muslim scholar, and that's because I had been to many Muslim lectures, like Muslim institutes take place in university settings where we actually pay for studying and study circles and things like that. So I could quickly see, and these are events which take place around the country, and theologians from across the world, from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from America, come and we study Islamic jurisprudence, Sharia, and things like that. And you're arguing that a better knowledge of Islam insulates you against extremist radicalisation. Absolutely, because
I've got no problem with that.
Morgan's piece yesterday that Muslims are not doing
keep
enough.
slagging off people I might bump into, but then again, given the company we're forced to keep on this radio station at the moment, I can hardly criticise you for that. Because Piers Morgan was talking about Muslims are not doing enough. Muslim leaders not doing enough. Yeah.
To be honest, I don't think that we have an added responsibility to condemn.
It's another comforting catchphrase, because we learned today that the man responsible for the atrocity in Manchester left his mosque in Didsbury because they were speaking out against Islamic State. So it's
you see the Boston bombers. They were actually kicked out of their mosque as well, because our mosques are not tolerating this. They are not tolerating this.
So weirdly,
I fear of reprisals.
Muslims must do more.
Against what they believe in.
I'm talking over you. Sorry, say that again.
It's because the ideology of ISIS goes against what is the mainstream Islamic thought, Orthodox Islam believes in. On what it's about. So if go on YouTube and look at Mufti Menk. I'll take your word for it. But what you're Norman Ali Khan, you're not seeing what's happening, but people.
And we haven't seen much coverage of the Muslim Council of Britain's absolutely no uncertain terms condemnation of what happened in Manchester on Monday night. It's as if, they need to do more. They need to do more. How much effort have you put into finding out what they're doing? Well, none whatsoever, but they need to do more. The imams and the mosques should be speaking out against it. They did, and it helped radicalise the bloke that blew himself up in Manchester on Monday night. Aisha, thank you. It doesn't sound to me as if you were sort of flirting with jihad, however sort of it might have felt to you at the time. Yeah.
I mean, in another argument that they say in response to that is, why don't you come out and say it on television?
Yes.
And the reason is, we don't do it for PR. We've got an added reason.
Also, you don't get booked. The number of times I've heard producers discussing swapping Anjem Chowdhury's phone number, I've never heard any of them say, who are we going to get on to speak for the massive majority of Muslims who recognise that every time one of these atrocity is committed, they run the risk not only of being a victim, but also of getting blamed for it. No, we don't need anyone like that. It doesn't put bums on seats. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Aisha, thank you. Taking me right up to the news. Zach, you'll be first after the news. If you're struggling to get through, remember the phone line that Aisha has just vacated could be yours if you're quick on 0345 606 0973. I'll do a recap. It's a bit like Mystery Hour, this, or Mystery 3 Hours. So, things that might make us feel safer. Question then transmogrifies into, would these things actually make us safer? There's some obvious answers to that. Aisha's just reminded of us another one. Muslims must do more. Muslims must do more to condemn it, but they kind of can't do much more. It's up to people like us at LBC, perhaps, to give them bigger platforms rather than just booking the ones that are going to start bonfires. A number of times I heard Chowdhury on that. Even, do you know where I bumped into Anjem Chowdhury last? The Alan Titchmarsh show on ITV. Anjem Chowdhury, who spoke for about 24 Muslims, hired by daytime television on ITV to somehow represent the entire... No wonder all the old people in the audience got spooked and started booing. And no wonder they all walked out thinking he was typical of everybody of a similar colour or faith. Just not true. But it's sensationalism. It's tabloid Britain. It works. It's selling tickets for the ghost train instead of the Speak Your Weight machine. If you look at the Speak Your Weight machine, as we'll continue to do after the very latest news headlines, you'll realise that so far none of these suggestions... none of them even get to second base. It's 11:30. Just trying to unpick some of the sensationalist sound bites, some of the comforting catchphrases that often appear at times like this, and work out what in the real world we can do to make ourselves be safer as opposed to feel safer. Although, like you right now, I'd take feeling safer as better than nothing. But before we return to that territory, I just want to share with you a story involving one of the victims of the Manchester bombing, whose name has now been released, and whose family want him to be remembered fondly, obviously, but their ambition is likely to be realised as a result of another occasion on which Martin Hett appeared in the media. He is one of the victims of the Manchester bombing, and The Independent and BuzzFeed are carrying absolutely beautiful accounts of something that he did last year. He was the one, I don't know if you're aware of this, that the comedian Jason Manford was part of the social media campaign to find him on Monday night. He was reported missing on Tuesday. He has now been confirmed as one of the victims of that terror attack. Martin Hett is his name. He'd been on telly a few times with odd things like his obsession with Deirdre Barlow. God, he sounds like a lovely lad. And his partner, Russell Hayward, described him today as wonderful, iconic and beautiful, saying he left the world exactly how he lived, centre of attention. I'm in a really bad way, so please forgive if I don't reply. This, I think, to a journalist. Thankfully, I have his wonderful and amazing friends to keep each other strong. I love you, Martin, I always will. And there is a piece in The Independent that says, we want to use this opportunity to flag up an act of kindness performed by Hett in November of last year, which got the whole internet talking. And I remember this story. He tweeted a picture of a Christmas fair featuring his mum's craft and knitting. Forgive me, Zach and John, I'll be with you imminently, but I think we all need little bits of light and happiness in such dark times, or in the aftermath of such a dark act. He tweeted a picture of his mum's craft table at a Christmas fair, and said, my mum has set up her own stall at a craft fair and has messaged me to say that she hasn't sold anything yet, and yet my heart is breaking. And that's what he tweeted. I don't know how many followers he had, but after posting the tweet and some pictures of his mother's creations from her online store, his friends and followers got in touch to ask if they could buy some of her adorable creations, and he published the interactions with his mum, saying, my friend Liam wants to buy that lavender glove puppet and various other things. She replied, yay, my first ever sale, can he pretty please do a review? How shall I give it to him? And then she'd been at one craft fair on Sunday. She said, I sold one teddy and one heart. I wasted a whole day, so this is really nice and motivating. And he stuck with it. Martin Hett, the late Martin Hett, God rest his soul. He stuck with it until his mum had sold absolutely everything she'd ever knitted. And she ended up appearing on daytime television, appearing on breakfast TV to talk about this astonishing sort of viral phenomenon that had seen an utterly ignored and bereft table at a craft fair in Manchester suddenly become an internet sensation and secure a complete sellout of everything she'd ever knitted. It's a beautiful story. I'll retweet it now from my Mr. James OB account if you want to have a look at it. But goodness me. 11:38 is the time. Back to the more serious end of our conversations today. Zach is in Cambridge. Zach, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Just to say thanks for doing this
show. You know, I think it's really good that we can talk about the solutions.
Even if the conclusion is that there might not be any.
Well, I think there might be.
Good.
So I have some hope. I completely agree with the last caller who said the answer is probably better religious education.
Yes.
So the thing that really got me about this story is that the attacker was a 22-year-old British Muslim, and I am a 22-year-old British Muslim as well.
Okay.
And this got me thinking about, what's the difference between me and him? Why has he committed this terrible crime and I haven't?
Yeah.
And I think that the answer to that is that, I'm at the University of Cambridge. When I came here, that was the first time that I'd really seen intellectual Muslims who were sort of taking their ideas from the religious texts. And it opened my eyes to, just a way of thinking that actually my liberal values are not, I don't hold them despite the Quran, but they're actually by the Quran. And I think that,
This is, correct me if I'm wrong, but the word would be ijtihad, would it?
So ijtihad is, I don't think it's quite separate actually. So ijtihad is the process by which you kind of reason towards, trying to understand how a principle applies in real life.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is liberal values.
Yeah. So absolutely.
The problem is, and this is, I think you're probably right, but of course what you're saying is that the answer to this epic problem caused by quotes religion end quotes, the solution is to have more religion.
Yes, that's absolutely what I'm saying.
And I think I agree with you, but you can understand why a lot of people will struggle with that until I point out that, you come to a better understanding of things. The more you learn, the more you teach, the more you think. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think people make the mistake of thinking that, Islam is like Christianity and that, it would be better if people sort of believed in it less and sort of cherry-picked a bit more.
Yes.
And sort of left the harmful things, whereas actually, I think a better understanding actually leads you down a more liberal path, and it's the radicals who are doing the cherry picking.
Well, there are two sections of society who believe that Islam leads to violence, terrorism, radicalisation and extremism. There are the violent radical extremists who are Muslims, and then there are all the knuckle draggers on the far right who also find the relevant parts of the text to prove that all Muslims are violent radical extremists. So apart from them, everybody else should be moving towards the place where you are.
And I hope that lots of people move towards the place where I am, because I think it's a better place to be.
Well, clearly. Do you have any inkling of how he could end up where he ended up, though? I get now a clear picture of why you've ended up where you ended up, both geographically at Cambridge University and intellectually. But do you understand how a 22-year-old lad with a PlayStation 4 habit and a fondness for cannabis and a passion for Manchester United, how he could end up blowing himself up in the middle of a crowd full of teenage girls?
Well, I think that the last caller might have, there's an answer in her story, in that, it's very easy to get angry about the sort of injustices in society and feel like you're targeted, and that can, make people justify all sorts of weird things.
Oh, God. You know what you've done? You know what you've just done, don't you?
Mm-hmm. What?
Well, we've got this long list of things that people believe will make us safer and make us feel safer. Lock people up coming back from Syria or tag them. That's the one I came closest to agreeing with. Punish the innocent members of the families of guilty people. Well, yeah, great. Internment, similarly, lock people up even though they haven't done anything wrong. Muslims must do more. They're doing loads. The bloke that blew himself up in Manchester left his mosque because it was doing so much to condemn Islamic State. Yeah. Integrate more. Well, hang on a minute. We've got a mayor of London who everyone is, a lot of people are very racist and Islamophobic towards. You can't get much more integrated than that. So none of these work. And you're suggesting we need to be less Islamophobic.
Yeah, I'd be in favour. In fact, if you find people who are sort of saying these sort of radical ideas, in public, that you put them on a forced religious education program. There are places. So we have in Cambridge the Cambridge Muslim College, which is actually training people who have had a classical Islamic training, and actually telling them about the modern problem.
Oh, I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, so helping them to understand the philosophy of the modern world and sort of Western ideas as well, so that they can come up with their own solutions to that problem. So I think that paths like that are the way to go. Whereas if we have internment and the rule of we get rid of the rule of law, I think that's going to make us all less safe.
And we don't have to travel to the Middle East to see the wisdom of what you say. We can just hop over the Irish Sea to see what internment and troops on the streets, what that does to the process of radicalising angry young people. Can I just run something by you, because it's one of my pet theories, and I just want to know whether or not you agree with it. If I was, because we don't know yet what caused this man's brain to turn to custard, but if I was seeking to radicalise somebody, Islamist radicalisation, and bearing in mind what Aisha up in Manchester told us about how it was the imprisonment without trial of two people she knew of that kind of just gave her that inclination to take one step towards the kind of stuff spouted by Anjem Choudhury. If I was trying to radicalise you, I would use the kind of, forgive me, I would use the rhetoric about Musrats and Muhammad the Prophet having a young bride that's proof of his deviant sexuality, and I would use all of these websites, all of these social media contributors, all of these newspaper columnists who write about Islam in a pretty vile way. I imagine they are the greatest recruiters for Islamist extremism in Britain today.
I mean, I don't know what I think about that.
Okay.
I don't think I have enough knowledge to say.
I'm just imagining what would turn my brain to custard if I was impressionable and vulnerable to that kind of rhetoric. See, look how much they hate you.
Mm-hmm. I know. I think that's part of it, and then I think they also might sell a story of, well, you can be the real sort of warrior for justice if you and that's not the way to go. But if you don't have a proper understanding of what Islam's really about, then you can get taken in by that, and you can start to believe that that's actually what Islam really is about.
On both sides. Again, we're back to the common ground between the extremists. I don't really have a proper understanding of what Islam is really about, but I know that it's not, because simple numbers tell me it's not about blowing yourself up in crowded rooms, because if that was really what every Muslim on the planet felt that they should be doing, the planet wouldn't be here. So you get that from both sides. You get tempted into jihadism by this sort of bogus reading of Islam, and you get tempted into sort of far-right fanaticism by this bogus reading of Islam. There's part of me that thinks we should just lock them all up in a room and let them slug it out together while people like Zach and I get on with trying to create a safer, happier, better world. It's 11:46, and it's a fascinating programme. I particularly enjoyed talking to Zach a moment ago, because he described himself as a 22-year-old British-born Muslim, an identical identity in this age of so-called identity politics to the person that blew himself up on Monday night. It shows you how complicated this whole issue is, that we don't know what to call him. I liked what Donald Trump said yesterday. That's a phrase I think you're only going to hear come out of my mouth on this occasion. Don't call him a monster. He wants to be called a monster. Call him an evil loser. Ian Brady, people close to him were explaining in the aftermath of his death that he would have loved nothing more than to see how he was portrayed in the tabloid newspapers. One newspaper today, The Sun, perhaps predictably, chooses to sort of lionise the dead man. There's a silhouetted picture of him under the headline "Evil." All the other newspapers choose to focus on the victims. But the tabloid way is not to deliberately do the opposite of what Ian Brady wanted. The tabloid way is to do whatever will excite the biggest emotional reaction among their readership. Sadly, that probably applies to terrorism as well. Not to do what makes us safer, but what gets the biggest bang out of the readership's buck. Which is why so many of these lines are, at first glance, quite seductive. Internment, integration, Muslims must do more. And yet, as we've demonstrated today, they don't stand up to the barest, the scantest scrutiny. The suggestions that perhaps do, for me at least, and I appreciate that, I don't think any of the atrocities that we've witnessed in recent months across Europe, I could be wrong on this, but I don't think any of them have been possibly one of the... Well, anyway, we know that the Monday night atrocity was not undertaken by somebody who had returned from Syria, where they'd been fighting for ISIS. It was someone who'd been to Libya, where his family had a history of fighting against Gaddafi, which is the side we were on when we started dropping bombs on the country. So I told you it was confusing. But I do see some sense, cautious sense, in the idea that, as Khalil suggested, the burden of proof in some of these cases is too high. it's almost impossible to prove beyond reasonable doubt that someone's been fighting for Islamic State in Syria. But I need a very, very, very good explanation of what the hell you think you were doing there before I would argue that you shouldn't be tagged at the very least and possibly prevented from ever returning to the country. You go to Syria to fight for Islamic State. And I don't think that evinces a dilution of my liberal values until you remind me that, say, I thought you believed in people being innocent until they were proven guilty. And now you're saying it doesn't really have to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. And so that sort of cautious support for the idea of diluting the burden of proof begins to struggle slightly. And then Aisha rings from Manchester to talk about how knowing of two men who were victims of a lowered burden of proof, because the security services possess some powers to pluck us off the street without justification, or at least without evidence, without traditional evidence trails being followed. And that knowledge actually just saw her take a baby step towards radicalisation. So I sit here thinking, well, one good way to stop it all from happening would be to lower the burden of proof. And she rings in to say, when the burden of proof was really low and two people were victims of that made me think that radicalisation might be the answer. It's 11:54. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. John's in Birmingham. Speaking of Birmingham, I saw one exchange on Twitter where it was an American wrote, there are no-go areas in Birmingham because of Muslims, and someone replied saying, I lived in Brum all my life. There aren't any no-go areas. And the American replied and said, yeah, you lived in Brum. Why not check out Birmingham? Do your research. Which kind of seemed emblematic of a broader truth. 11:55 is the time. John, what would you like to say?
Hello there.
Hello, John.
Hello there. I will try and be brief. Forgive me, this is the first time I've ever been
Take your time.
radio before.
Take your time, my friend.
In the mid-2000s, I served with the British forces in Iraq, and at two separate stages of my duties, I was military personnel acting as guard duty for what was called DTDF, a detention facility embedded within the Shaiba Logistics Base in South Iraq.
Gosh.
Now, I wasn't in a situation where I was obviously in charge. We reported to people called the Military Provost Service, or the Army equivalent of the prison service. And the people who were in the facility were people who had been picked up from various places in Iraq for a number of reasons, and were basically being held there before they decided what to do with them.
Right.
Basically, they were going to let them go or pass them over to the Iraqis in order to deal with. And there was quite a mixed bag of people in there. So there were a couple of people, for example, who'd been arrested who were in the Mahdi army, Jaish al-Mahdi. So obviously, they were quite clearly bad lads. Yes. But there were other people as well who were, in essence, were there because no one really knew what to do with them.
Gosh.
There was one lad, I think he was basically in there for his own protection. I'm going to have to be really careful, James, I'm sorry, because I have to say I'm still covered by the Official Secrets Act, so I'll try not to give too many details.
Of course. Speaking as broader brushstrokes as you like, John, your insights are very valuable to us.
Yeah, there was one guy in there who was basically in for his own protection because insurgents had basically given an ultimatum, which was, you're going to help us or we're going to murder your family.
Yeah.
So once again, he was in there because no one really knew what to do with him. There was another guy who was in there because he did have, or we were told,
yeah,
we never knew their names. We were only given numbers to address them by. We were told that he was involved in some of the low-level financing of Al Qaeda. And he was there for ages. And I think he was originally from North London. I think he was Iraqi, settled in North London, so he had perfect English.
Yes.
We were told, obviously, not to engage with him,
sure,
really, in any way other than beyond politeness.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was there because no one knew what to do with him. Eventually, not eventually. One of the things that struck me was you kind of go in, and if you're in the forces, you're very, up and at them. Things are quite black and white.
Of course.
And
ours is not to reason why.
Well, absolutely. But one of the things that I kind of realised, because one of the things that we had to do as part of our duties every week was to have visitors, and so members of the family, etc., could come and visit them for a morning on a Friday morning. Yeah. Periodically with everybody, they would have a case review, and they would be told at one point, we're going to let you go, or, we're going to be further processed, or we're just going to hang on to you for a bit later. And I remember this one guy's wife, when we were dealing with her, is basically, he'd obviously spoken to her about the fact he was being held for the next chunk of time. And, she was in tears, quite obviously, because she was there and she was just being strung along. No idea of what was going to happen to her husband because, he was in this holding pattern. So I don't really know what I'm trying to say.
I do. I do. Let me try and tell you what you're trying to say, if that doesn't sound too too mad. You're trying to say that sometimes we just don't know what to do.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There is no right or wrong way. So, sometimes there is just events.
There is. I found, weirdly, for me, it made me more liberal, if you like, seeing what was going on. I felt that really the reason that people were being held was because someone wasn't prepared to do their job and make a decision.
Right. Yeah. Gosh. Yes. I've got you. Wow. Mate, I had a lot. I mean, you won't be interested in this particularly. A lot of people have asked me on social media over the last sort of 24 hours or so how I can stay working at a radio station that is associated with some fairly vile people at the moment. You, mate, John, you are the reason why I'm staying here for the duration, because when I get calls like yours, it makes me feel very privileged. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. It's coming up to 12 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time is approaching 12 noon. Gosh. Wow. Okay, everybody take a moment. James writes, I've just switched on to catch you saying, gosh, wow, what a call. It's times like this I wish radio had a rewind button. Some radios do, I think, and you can always avail yourself of the podcast service over at lbc.co.uk, James. Do you know, I'm not going to embarrass John in Birmingham, and I'm not sure that I did properly distill the point he was making. Matt's been in touch to say, I think he's actually saying that we aren't always the good guys that we paint ourselves as. I think you're right, that was part of what he was saying as well. But, Walter Mitty's, who embellish and exaggerate military service and stuff like that. You've got to trust your instincts. There's something when John said, I've got to be careful what I say, James, because I'm still under the terms of that. You just knew he was telling the truth. Just knew he was the real deal. It's odd, that, isn't it? Because I've in the past, I remember once we did it's one of the reasons I never do phone-ins on have you ever taken the law into your own hands, because you just get phone calls off fantasists. One bloke rang in and claimed he'd been in the Marines and said a couple of things. For example, he said he'd been in the Marines, not the Royal Marines, which is a bit of a giveaway, I'm told. But I just knew he was a fantasist, as he was describing how he dislocated the arm of a burglar that he found in his bathroom one night. It's just weird how you pick up on these things. I could be wrong, but I'm 99.9, that's 100% sure I wasn't wrong about John. What a call. 4 minutes after 12 is the time, and the questions continue. I can't do a show on this because I couldn't really just string it out for a whole hour on my own if nobody rang in. The phone lines are full at the moment. I'll do my best to free up a couple in a minute. But I think the people I need to talk to next are the people who are in the foothills of whatever vile mountain it was that the man responsible for the murders in Manchester on Monday night ended up at the top of. That journey, the end of that journey. So Aisha was interesting. It is an us and them rhetoric. It has to be. I feel that people like me are being unfairly treated, and then it is a problem for the whole of Islam, because anybody who is Muslim can feel aggrieved. I used to get confused about how a British Muslim could somehow apparently have more fellow feeling for the victim of a bombing campaign in Yemen, feeling that is something that's been done to your brothers and sisters, but you care less about somebody you went to school with who lives on your own street. I still find that backwards and wrong, but I don't think it's as widespread as I used to think it was. This is about Britain, it's about our community. But if you feel alienated and ostracised from the mainstream, if you feel rejected by Britain, that seems to me to be one of the steps towards radicalisation that we could probably all agree on. Unless, of course, you're one of the people doing the rejecting of all Muslims. If you're one of the people who claims to want integration and then sends racist abuse to Sadiq Khan, who's about as integrated as any Muslim can be, then you're going to hate the suggestion that actually one of the crucial constituents of radicalisation is Islamophobia. I don't really see how anybody sensible can argue with that. Do you? So what I would love to do, at risk of sounding like Kevin Keegan, is talk to somebody who is there, tempted by this, thinking, you don't know what it's like to be a Muslim, James. I don't think I'd ever blow myself up in a crowded room, but I understand anger, I understand violence, I understand hatred, fury. All you ever do on the British media is talk about the hatred, the fury, and the anger of the far right, of kind of racist people. In fact, why not talk about the fury and the anger of people like me? I could end up being an extremist. I would love to talk to you. I would love to take a moment to employ all of the tools that I use with the far-right fanatics to demonstrate why their position is bogus, immoral and wrong. I could do it with you, I reckon, if you gave me a chance. 0345 606 0973. Sarah is in Manchester. A lot of calls from Manchester, which is very gratifying, albeit in pretty grim circumstances. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hello, Sarah.
Hi. Obviously, since Monday, it's been hard.
Yes.
I'm a Muslim. My normal dress is, jeans and a top, but I do wear a headscarf, and I have done for 12 or 15 years even.
Sure. 12 or 15 years. That's not a figure of speech I've come across before.
I can't actually remember. I think it might be 12. But
Okay.
for a long time. So it's been many, many years.
Yes.
But yesterday was... I didn't go out on Monday, but yesterday when I went out, I needed to get shopping. So I should have done it on Monday, but because all day I was just glued to the TV and watching the news, and all the roads were closed, and I just kind of put it off. So when I was going out yesterday, that was the first time actually in all them years that I've actually thought, do I actually want to put my headscarf on?
Yeah.
Am I going to be dealing with, I don't know what I now may have to face, if that makes sense. So
of course it makes sense.
Everybody's scared. Just because I'm a Muslim, that doesn't mean I feel safe.
No, I reiterate the position that you're in, even though some people find it very uncomfortable listening. You are at risk of both being blown up and of being blamed next time somebody gets blown up.
Yes, definitely. I'm a double kind of crossroad thing where I'm at the receiving end of both. So I could either go out and have abuse thrown at me or being spat at
because of terrorists.
Done before,
yes.
Which I have had done before.
Great.
Or I could be in town, because I live right near town. I live 5 minutes from the Manchester Evening News Arena. I could be in town shopping, and I could get blown up there. So I'm at the both. I could be on the receiving end of both.
What are you going to do?
What am I going to do? Well, when I went out yesterday, I was at the till, and there was a couple of older generation, let's say, probably 60, 70 plus.
Yeah.
And they were, chatting away amongst themselves, and, as you do, make normal conversation, about your shopping or whatever.
Yeah.
And as I was paying, the two gentlemen that were behind me, they said to the lady who was serving me, if they were all like that, then we wouldn't really have a problem, would we? Now, I can understand where he's coming from, but like I said, it wasn't a direct, anything.
No, and it wasn't
me,
even... No, but
and it wasn't his fault. I understand it's not his fault, but just as it's not his fault, it's not my fault either.
Yeah.
On Monday, I made a point of ringing, 3 different radio stations in Manchester.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Not because I'm not one to kind of, come... I've listened to LBC for many, many years, but, rarely do I, need to come on. I feel like, a lot of people say what maybe I was going to say anyway, so, that's okay. But, the fear is not something that I don't have as a Muslim, just because I'm Muslim. I have the same amount of fear. I fear for my children too. And, these people that recruit these mentally distorted youngsters from these communities, that's the only way I can describe it, because these are vile human beings. They don't follow a religion, because if they did, they wouldn't be doing things like this.
No.
These people target some people that are vulnerable, maybe people that don't have parents around them, people that are from broken homes, people that have had maybe some kind of incident happen to them. And this has been, you'll see that there's always a trigger. There's always a trigger. You won't have, you know, my niece goes to Salford University. She's doing software engineering. She won't one day just all of a sudden turn into this fanatic.
No.
Something has to happen in order for her to all of a sudden just change. And that's something that we as a family, our job as a family, we are there to support her and make sure that our children don't make these kind of mistakes. But these people will only target the youngsters that are vulnerable, that don't have that support network, that are, you know, turning away from mosques because mosques seem to be kind of against ISIS and against extremism. They will target these youngsters that are alone and by themselves and lonely and spend all their time on the internet and, you know, the dark net. This is where these children get picked up. I've got 3 children myself. 2 of them go to the local mosque to learn Arabic. But yesterday when they came, you know, on Monday, we listened to kind of, you know, the radio on the way to school and stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, my daughter, she was 8. She was the same age as that young girl on TV. And, you know, she said to me, Mum, how can he be Muslim? Because we're Muslim, and we're not allowed to do that. We couldn't ever do anything like that. My children go to Catholic schools and have done since they were very, very young. So she couldn't understand why somebody would do something like that. And there's nothing that I can say to her. I can't make her understand because we, as a whole, we don't understand it ourselves. I don't understand it. I don't understand how or why anybody would go out of their way to hurt somebody else, to blow up other people's children. You really got to be mentally gone up there. There's definitely got to be something absent up there for you to be able to think that that's normal and I'm going to go and do that and then, you know, it's going to be okay. Because that idiot now has gone and blown himself up and ruined hundreds of people's families. And then the backlash is faced by millions of people like myself, maybe in other different countries, and, you know, and we bear the brunt of it. Many a times I've gone out and heard comments and you just think, oh, you know, I don't want to report it to the police because I don't want an issue made out of it.
Yeah.
But then how am I safe? Where do I feel safe? I was born and brought up here. I actually left a comment on your video yesterday that you LBC uploaded to Facebook, and the amount of abuse I had on there, I was condemning what happened, and I was having people telling me that just because I'm born here, that doesn't make me one of you.
It's probably best to avoid the LBC Facebook page, to be honest. We don't regulate it in any way.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. What do I need to do to become one of you? I was born here. My parents were born here. My great grandparents came here many, many years ago. Paid probably. But this is.
It's not much of a silver lining, but that's precisely the point I've been making all morning about people saying you need to integrate more. You can't.
Yeah.
They don't mean that when they say you need to integrate more. They don't mean. They mean you need to know your place.
Yeah, I don't need to. I don't have my life history on the back of me written on a piece of paper just to show how integrated I am, or that I was educated here and that I can speak fluent English and that I can, that I have a degree. I don't have that. Nobody should need to walk around with a plaque on their head or on their back saying, well, I've got this and I've got this.
No, but forgive me, Sarah, forgive me. That I said this to a Jewish mother many years ago before I realised that anything that stepped out of the most vanilla of platitudes when discussing Judaism and some other religious matters was like painting a target on your back. I said she told me about her lad getting beaten up because he was wearing a yarmulke, and I said, well, tell him to take it off. So there is a little bit of me when you say I don't have a target on my back, I don't have a sign declaring this, that or the other. I said, well, why do you wear your headscarf then? And I know that's sort of giving in to the hate, but when people tell me there's no such thing as Islamophobia, the fact that you get attacked in the streets simply for wearing a headscarf means that there is. They're not attacking some complicated scriptural analysis of the Quran or objecting to something in the hadith that they find repellent. They're objecting to you being present in front of them, and the headscarf is the signifier that gives them the green light to spit at you.
But it's not just people that are wearing a headscarf, James. This is what you're, maybe you think it's just a headscarf. There's a lot of people that aren't even Muslim, that look Asian, that will now face the brunt of this as well. You don't have to wear.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely. But that's where the conversation began, of course, with you saying it for the first time ever. You toyed with the idea of not wearing it. The point is, of course, that that's just a sliding scale. Today you don't wear the headscarf. Tomorrow you get spat at just for being brown. It's 12:16. Sarah, thank you. Take it as a compliment that we're a little bit late for the travel. Touched a lot of people, Sarah, on all sides. Well, not all sides, obviously. I don't think you or I possess whatever tools are needed to actually prick the balloons of genuine extremism. But we'll keep trying. 20 minutes after 12, one of the immediate responses to the tragedy, the atrocity on Monday night, is, of course, the deployment of troops on the street, something that the Prime Minister is empowered to do when the threat level rises from severe to critical. And as an earlier caller pointed out, they will be deployed at places particularly likely to be targeted. It raises the slightly uncomfortable image of armed troops as opposed to almost ceremonial soldiers being deployed in the environs of Buckingham Palace, which is where LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood is now. Have we got troops on the streets already, Theo?
They haven't yet arrived, James. We're expecting them shortly. Just to give you a picture of Buckingham Palace, you have the sentry posts outside the facade of the palace itself. That's not going to change. You then have, by the gate, 5 or 6 policemen and women who are heavily armed. They've had their Weetabix this morning. They are going to be replaced with armed members of the military so that they can go and do other duties, and we're expecting that to be replicated at Downing Street, the Palace of Westminster, Parliament, and embassies across London. As well as that, Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, has been chairing Cobra this morning, and she's given this update.
Operation Tempora has now been invoked, and that means that there will be additional military personnel coming to backfill the armed police officers so that they can support other areas. Today we have 984 members of the military coming forward as requested by the police. They will be initially deployed in London but also in the rest of the country as requested.
Questions, of course, this morning as well about when general election campaigning will be resumed. There is frustration amongst a few Labour candidates that I've spoken to that this delay because of the threat level being raised to critical and the deployment of troops means that it's very difficult for Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, to get his voice heard. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, obviously has to do what she's got to do. I've spoken to her side as well, and they're saying that constitutionally she has to act in the way that she has done. But given that we have NATO and the G7 coming up, which will take us through from Thursday through to Saturday, and she doesn't campaign on Sunday, there is a possibility that the campaign could be delayed, or the restart could be delayed until Monday, and that is creating an uneasiness in Labour circles, and many Labour MPs, a couple I've spoken to, have already gone out and resumed campaigning at a local level.
Do we know when the official green light will be issued?
No, we don't. At the moment, all we know is that there's going to be a conversation between all 4 main parties this afternoon. Labour would like it to resume tomorrow or Friday. But as I said, with the Prime Minister firstly in Brussels for NATO and then in Sicily for the G7, and we know how central she has been to the Conservative campaign, it's difficult to see how campaigning, especially from a Conservative point of view, can resume when she's not in the country. Added to that, with the threat level at critical, you're talking about, campaigning-wise, large amounts of people in a small amount of space around each of the party leaders, and that creates its own security threat. And if you have, as I say, the threat level as it is now, at the highest possible level, that creates a real problem, a real headache for the security services.
Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. Busy man, not set to see his workload get any lighter in the coming weeks or days. 03456060973 is the number you need to contribute to our conversation today. To recap, all of the things that we think might make us feel safer, all of the things I could get paid probably twice as much as I do now if I wrote newspaper columns, explain why we need to do this and we need to do that. Okay, we need to intern people, okay? That means that you're in favour of concentration camps being built on British soil in which British citizens can be locked up without trial. By all means, stick with it, but be clear on what it is you're in favour of. And be clear that you don't get to choose who gets locked up next without trial, okay? Muslims must do more, okay? Well, The mosque in which the Manchester bomber used to pray, he left because, like every mosque I'm aware of in this country in 2017, they regularly and routinely preach against Islamic State and everything it represents. Don't quite see how they can do more. Similarly, this text just come in. I don't know if you planned it, but today's show feels profoundly positive. It's really lifted my mood, hearing so many wonderfully good Muslim people phoning in. It won't always work, because, of course, some people are determined to hold on to their hate, even when they're given uncontrovertible evidence that they shouldn't be so full of hate. Enter this character. It's so sad. Just so that you can indulge in your virtue signalling, you have forgotten about the poor babies who have been slaughtered by the religion of peace. So you're always going to have that, but the more light you shine, the more impossible it becomes for someone like that to pretend that they're acting in any way other than being determined to hate. I must hate, as all extremists do. All extremists have to hate. It's all they have. I would rather deal with extremists tweeting cowardly messages from anonymous social media accounts than deal with extremists walking into concert halls full of children in Manchester. But the only thing that they can all be safely described as having in common is an absolute certainty that their hatred is both real and completely justified. What else have we got? Integration. Funny that, because anyone who ever talks to me about how we need more integration seems to be at the front of the queue for putting the boot into Sadiq Khan every time he comes into the building. If you get yourself elected as the mayor of the capital city of a country, it's hard to imagine how you can be more integrated into that society. So we have to reluctantly conclude that almost all of the people talking about integration aren't actually talking about integration. They're just hoping to exercise a right to tell other people how they are and are not allowed to behave. And that's pretty much it. The ones I quite like, although I recognise that as my emotional reaction to events in Manchester retreats slightly and my intellectual analysis of actual facts and evidence reasserts itself, I'll stop liking this. Right now, as a dad, I would be comfortable with people believed to be returning from Syria being locked up. I'd be comfortable with that suspension of the rule of law, the burden of proof, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. If MI5 say he was there, that's good enough for me. Lock him up. But, of course, that means I'm now endorsing, live on the radio, the idea of imprisonment without trial. And why am I doing that? Because of an attack upon Western values. And what is a belief that imprisonment without trial is fundamentally wrong? It's a Western value. So even I have been led into that place where I'm responding to an attack on Western values by calling for, an abandonment of Western values. I little like the lady who rang in earlier calling for the families of suicide bombers to be punished. Because, of course, you can't punish a dead person, a point that seems to have been lost on a lot of my correspondents claiming that this is proof positive we need to bring back the death penalty. OK, geniuses, he's already dead. So we'll punish their families instead, a policy that is pursued in some cases by the Israeli government and doesn't seem from this side of the world to have had much of an impact upon people prepared to kill themselves in the commission of terrorist acts in that part of the world. But if you're in favour of punishing the families of terrorists, you're in favour of punishing innocent people. But there's no getting away from it. You're in favour of punishing innocent people, criminalising, deporting, interning, call it what you will, actually innocent people. If you're in favour of doing that, you're a hell of a lot closer to people who want the medieval flavoured Sharia law to be the system under which they live than you are to me with my Western values, my British culture, my liberal beliefs. You want to lock up innocent people? So do Islamic State. You want to intern people who haven't done anything wrong? So do Islamic State. You want to integrate more? Well, I'll show you an integrated Muslim and she'll tell you about how she gets spat at for wearing a headscarf. And then you get the clever middle class purporters of these kind of positions, the ones that say, there's no such thing as Islamophobia. There's just an objection to some specific tenets of faith that are clearly a threat to civilized society. And they're the ones that do the lectures and write the books. And I feel a little bit sorry for the skinheads over in the corner thinking, why can't I do lectures and write books? He's not saying anything that I don't say. He hates Muslims too. He's just dressing it up in intellectual clothes. Why can't I do that? Why can't I get on the telly more? I feel almost sorry for the knuckle draggers. A woman gets spat at for wearing a headscarf. That is not somebody who has decided in their ivory tower that there are specific tenets within the Quran that render it fundamentally different from all other Abrahamic religions, and it truly does pose a threat to Western values. Europe really is under siege. Just jog on, will you? Go for a pint with a Muslim lad and let him tell you whether or not he's besieging your country or I don't know, possibly just a little bit like you, although he can't tell his mum that he's been for a pint because she still thinks he's a good Muslim lad. It's 12:30, where the conversation has been, well, at once dispiriting and uplifting. Dispiriting because, guess what? Turns out there aren't any easy answers to complicated questions. Unless, because you're an extremist. I suppose that blowing yourself up in a crowd could be construed as an answer to a complicated problem, a simple answer to a complicated problem. You'll allow me for suggesting it doesn't really make the world a better place, though. And in terms of radical Islamist extremism, Islamist terrorism, the answer of how we can be safer or feel safer, all of us, not just those of us who aren't Muslims, but those of us who are Muslims as well, because, of course, they run the double risk of both being blown up and or being blamed for it. It's got a funny text, and at times like this you kind of need the humour. My mate, where is it? Is it my mate who was proper Welsh, James, but quite suntanned, got gypped for being Syrian in the street the other day. It's a sort of, I chuckle, but you know, it seems to be the direction in which we're headed. Day before that terror attack in Manchester, or the day of it actually, I think a man was jailed for kicking a pregnant Muslim woman in the stomach for the crime of wearing a headscarf. But hey, you know, that's not Islamophobia. He's just objecting to the specific tenets of her faith when he kicked her in the stomach, despite not being able to write his own name. No such thing as Islamophobia. She lost the baby. 12:35 is the time. Ali is in Slough. Ali, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James. Very somber day to talk about this, but you cited Martin Niemöller at the top of your programme.
I often do. I probably should do it less, actually.
No, should do it more. What his experience teaches us is when the majority look inward on any minority in a society, we're in a very dark place. And why Martin Niemöller ended there was because of another German called Bruno Bauer, who coined Die Judenfrage. And he said, words to the effect, the Jews had to achieve political emancipation only if they relinquished their particular religious consciousness and ideology.
Right, gosh.
80 years later, mate.
Juden what? What was the second bit of that phrase?
Bruno Bauer, Die Judenfrage, the Jewish question in German.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah. He coined...
So, well, that's an echo, isn't it?
40s.
Yes.
Well, this is why I say to you, James, you know, the temptation at times like this of looking for something or someone to jump on is an emotional reaction to hurt. We all have it. I had to explain to my teenage daughter the day this happened, which I was dropping her off to school, that if a warped person wants to attack a place because what they... I'm not defending this, by the way, but just use the logic.
Yes.
Because he's protesting against innocent killings of people in the Middle East or wherever, he is doing exactly the same thing that he is saying is wrong. And that's the warped paradox that some people like that live in, whoever they might be, if it's a Muslim, non-Muslim, secular, I don't care. The principle must hold solid. And where we are now with the use of the word extremism as a catch-all for religious identity, it's the modern-day Die Judenfrage, I say with reluctance.
Well, I don't have the education to either concur or contradict you on that, but if you describe it to me correctly, and the idea was you can only be let's use the language that we've been using all morning, you can only integrate if you completely abandon your culture and religion, then...
particular religious, because look, so forgive me for interrupting, James.
No, it's all right. I can hardly complain, can I?
Well, thank you. What he said, this is the point here, look, in this country, people of Muslim, Jewish, and other faiths have lived here for centuries, okay? And what was striking was that there was tolerance, but the extremism or counter-extremism program known as PREVENT, you talked about collective punishment. Now, the entire religious... Christian and Jews have been caught up in this, by the way. Of course, the targets were Muslims. And now some extreme right-wing EDLers have been snared in the noose as well.
Sure.
Collectively punishing communities that are different, whether they're Muslim or otherwise, because of some criminal nut job or a megalomaniac who wants to go and commit maximum harm. I mean, in this case, only Thomas Hamilton has excelled him at Dunblane when he killed 16 5, 6-year-olds, whatever it was, I can't remember. We haven't had something, thankfully, like this for so long, especially the death of children, which is particularly moving. So I caution everybody that's listening that, look, at the end of the day, we live in a shared space. We should not force integration down the necks of people because of the criminal acts of 1 or 2 or 5
I hear you, and I register, and people not familiar with the Martin Niemöller who we're talking about, it's that very famous poem, although...
I'll read it to you if you want.
Have you got it right in front of you?
I have.
Yeah, go on then, quickly.
First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
And the echoes are clear. I want to run something by you, because I get sent quotes from the various sort of middle class justifiers, educated intellectual justifiers of anti-Islamic feeling, or Islamophobia, as I can't help but call it. And here's one of them. So deal with this. It's not because of the terrible act of that man in Manchester on Monday night that we're calling for action. It's because this is Sam Harris. Islam is a system of ideas and practices. It is not a form of bigotry or racism to observe that the specific tenets of the faith pose a special threat to civil society, nor is it a sign of intolerance to notice when people are simply not being honest about what they and their co-religionists believe. So
I'll answer that question head on, James. Look,
I think you already have, but I'd like to hear it.
I live in Britain. My granddad fought the Nazis in the Second World War, and he fought the Japanese as well, for good measure. But I'm a Muslim. I'm proud of my Muslim identity. I believe in a creator. It's not superstition.
I'm losing the phone line, Ali. Sorry, mate. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but the reason I read the quote was because it kind of evidenced what you were describing as having happened in Nazi Germany, which is you're not allowed to be a Jew. The only way you can properly integrate is if you recognise the fundamental wrongness of your religion, of your culture, of your background, and that is what the middle class. What word do I want? The sort of intellectual anti-Islam wing believe. You don't understand. You have to understand. This is an ideology that is absolutely threatening Western civilization, Western values, and until you abandon it, you cannot help but be part of the problem. 12:41 is the time. Ali, we'll talk again. Dan's in Croydon. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Dan.
First time caller.
Where have you been all my life, Dan?
I know. I listen to you every day at work, which I shouldn't really do. But
sure,
anyway,
I won't tell anyone if you don't.
I'm a master's student at UCL studying countering organised crime and terrorism. So I felt like I wanted to kind of give a call, kind of give my view. Just to pick you up on one point, you are right that generally discriminate acts and indiscriminate acts of coercion do actually lead to long-term increases in terrorist attacks, particularly in Israel. Actually, there was a study which showed that while in the short term, discriminate acts of coercion, such as the bulldozing of homes of known terrorists, do show a short-term decrease in attacks. In the long term, it does actually show an increase because you get the communities who will see these acts of atrocity against their communities, against their neighbours, and then it will increase.
I mean, you're referring to academic research, which I haven't got in front of me, but I find that easy to believe.
Yeah, absolutely. But the same way, it needs to be taken into account that concessionary acts which are discriminate towards known terrorists are also bad. They do also increase attacks. What really governments need to do, which the evidence is there, especially in the case of Israel, but also Northern Ireland, is that indiscriminate acts of concession, where it's just building schools, hospitals, just improving the lives of people within the communities which are prone to join terrorist organisations, that is the most effective way.
But that wouldn't work in Britain, would it?
It depends, because I think you are right that Islamophobia may well kind of act as one of the factors which could cause individuals from Muslim communities to feel like there's an injustice against them. But you also need to take into account that for most people who join terrorist organisations, they don't really know much about the political ideology that they're joining. A lot of them do it because they want a sense of belonging. One of the main purchases of British Muslims that go over to Syria to fight for Islamic State, one of the biggest buys is actually beginner's guides to Islam. They don't actually know much about it.
I have heard that before. So what are they drawn to then?
they're drawn to a sense of excitement. They're drawn to a sense of belonging. The sort of the same way that young people want to rebel potentially against a life which they see is quite mediocre, and that's something which Islamic State, in its absolute extreme, does try and offer, or at least pretends to offer people. There are also individuals naturally who are just prone to commit acts of violence, the same way that you get people joining gangs for a sense of belonging, but also because they are...
but then you have another leap, don't you, towards suicide bombing, which is not explicable through just a fetishization of violence. That's something very different, isn't it? And that has to involve the afterlife. This was one of the conversations we were going to have, but we've been overtaken by time. In that if you're selling the idea of heaven, even if you're selling it through doing good works and looking after the poor, the idea of going to heaven for doing something that the rest of us consider utterly vile, you can't fight that.
That's certainly true, that if an individual is really thinking their life is that bad and that mediocre, that they should just end their life right now with the promise of heaven. But I think if you do improve the opportunities of individuals within those areas, then they may be less likely, maybe not all of them, but certainly maybe some of them, maybe most of them will be less likely to go down that.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, of course, if you see it as a process, then you can stop the process earlier. In many ways, you're the most powerful weapon against that thing I've been just describing as the kind of middle-class anti-Islam movement, where they claim, no, I'm not Islamophobic or racist at all. I just read the Quran very closely, and I know exactly what it is these people believe, because the people going to Syria or turning up in Manchester to blow themselves up don't have a sophisticated understanding of any interpretation of Islam. They've just got a sort of itch that needs scratching.
Certainly with most of them, but just to make another point, when it comes
briefly,
to...
I'm late for the travel.
Sure, okay. Most terrorists who commit acts, whether they're group actor or lone actor, tell someone before they actually carry out the attack. So I think there is certainly an effort that needs to be made by the government to encourage people within the communities which unfortunately have individuals who join terrorist organisations to really report any incidents, or whether it's a friend, a family member,
or even just suspicions. But then the parallel with gangs that you made earlier kicks in for me, and we have a culture right across this country that grassing, that telling tales is somehow wrong. But there are grounds for optimism. The most recent arrest of the man in the environs of Westminster Bridge after the terror attack, who was found with a bag of knives, had been dobbed in by his own mother. So obviously we need a hell of a lot more than that, even if it turns out to be groundless. A suspicion, I think you'd report a suspicion, but then you have to put yourself in the mind of the person doing the reporting and say, what would you do if it was your brother? Would you dob your brother in? It's a big ask. A big ask, but we've got to keep asking. It's 12:46. Just hearing that armed forces are raiding a Manchester city centre building. More on that as and when we receive details. I've just seen that on the Manchester Evening News Twitter feed. I don't think it's reached the broadcast media yet, so I will endeavour to find out more about that if I can. Otherwise, Sheila Fogarty will be here in 8 minutes' time and no doubt steering you through that issue and all the others that are under discussion. We've done a lot today, and it's not been an entirely dispiriting experience. I appreciate that this tiny little radio show in this tiny little corner of the capital doesn't make a particularly big impact on anything. Of course I do, but I do think sometimes talking, I don't always succeed in staying calm. I do my best. I'm sometimes a bit unkind, a bit unpleasant to callers. I'm only human. And I do understand that an awful lot of people who are frightened and or angry are not deserving of being labelled bigots or racists or any of those things. But I really feel that we've had a good time today, just by looking at some of the questions calmly. What do you think would help? And then realising that actually none of these things would really help. And a lot of the things that we keep telling Muslims they need to do, they already do. Maybe they could do more. I certainly think reporting suspicions of your relatives, but, Crime Stoppers doesn't exactly get inundated with the mothers of bank robbers and murderers, does it, who probably have suspicions about what their families are up to. On this front, though, that seems to me to be one thing we can take away from this. A little more controversially, we need less Islamophobia or Muslimophobia, which I think some pedants might prefer as a description of what we're talking about. I don't hate Muslims. I just hate the ideology and the specific tenets of their faith. Okay, all right, well, stop spitting at women in headscarves then and kicking pregnant women in the stomach because are Muslim. We call it Muslimophobia. So if you help to create an environment in which it's harder to persuade a hot-headed young Muslim that the West hates him, then we're all helping out, right? I always thought right back at the beginning, it was pointing and laughing was the response. Right back when we started talking about this, I used to get calls from that headbanger who legged it. Is it Omar Bakri Mohammed? Used to ring me up, start shouting at me. I say, mate, you don't frighten me. I don't think you're terrifying. Same with Chowdhury. Never booked him on this programme. Wouldn't give him the pleasure of thinking that he was some sort of pantomime villain who gets the whole country to start booing. You see it right across the political spectrum. People whose entire act is based upon pantomime villainy. But look where it's led us, not standing up or not resisting properly. So I think Donald Trump actually got it right. So just evil losers, not monsters, evil losers who hope that by inculcating hate, they somehow sort of create a legacy. And that legacy is more hate. That legacy is, well, I hate you, and I hate you, and I hate... Oh, no, I don't hate anyone. I just hate the specific tenets of their faith. Yeah, right. Save it for the judge, wherever you went to school. It's coming out to 12:55. So the list of things that might help is very, very short. But that, of course, won't stop the tabloids from pretending that they believe it is long and simple. Haroon's in Oxford. Haroon, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to share a reflection of mine which I had following the attack, and I know this is kind of a period for mourning and trying to process such senseless evil. It's probably not the most important reflection, but I'm a young British Muslim. I was born here, brought up here. And if I'm honest, I haven't really experienced too much racism and direct racism in my life so far. I went to public school. I'm at Oxford now, and I haven't really felt any Islamophobia. But you see things on the news, you hear things, you feel things, and you maybe get a sense that some parts of the country don't feel that people like me belong here or should be here. And sometimes you do question, perhaps maybe they're right, maybe I don't fully belong here, maybe this isn't the place for me, this isn't my home. But I think one thing, if any, this senseless violence, if it has as any purpose for me, is that it's answered that question of whether I belong here with a resounding yes. That I feel, today I feel more British than I've ever felt before, because I was, watching on TV yesterday, the people who lost their lives, parents didn't have their children anymore, children didn't have their parents. And I felt a special kind of pain. These kind of attacks seem to happen every other day across the world. But the fact that it happened in Britain to my people, to my nation, it was kind of an emotional response, which I don't feel we can force. It's either there or it isn't.
You describe fellow feeling, but how do you counter the people who say this is not your nation, this is not your country, until you abandon the specific tenets of your faith that I find repellent? You can't be properly integrated. You can't be properly British.
I think people are entitled to their view, but what I would say is, from my point of view, I feel very strongly connected to all British people. And from my point of view,
I do too. That's the weird thing, isn't it?
And I feel, that whatever their response is, their response may be. But from my point of view, and I'm sure from the point of view of the many, other hundreds of thousands, millions of Muslims who live here, we feel, and I feel very strongly emotionally attached to and culturally attached to those other British people, whatever they may think of me and whatever their response may be. And I'm sure some people may have, responded to this attack by a hardening of views of people like me. But my response is not, and I think really that only serves the purpose of the terrorists, the people who are trying to divide us. And I think the best response is to not allow them to be successful. So I'm not going to let them be successful. And I'll say I feel more connected and more integrated in this country than ever before. But it's up to other people how they respond to that. But that's my point of view from my side.
What are you studying?
I'm studying law. I'm in my first year at Oxford.
I don't know why I wanted to know, Haroon. I just did. I'm a curious fellow. Thank you for that. I mean, obviously it's uplifting to hear you say that. I'm not quite as optimistic as you are, but then, as you said yourself, you're not in receipt of the kind of hatreds that I routinely get exposed to. I mean, even getting directed at me for simply saying that people like you aren't evil or rotten or wrong or unpleasant or unwelcome or somehow unclean, but long may you persist in that belief. Long may you hold that belief. In fact, I hope you hold it forever. It's coming up to 12:59, 12:58. I've got about 60 seconds left. Hamza is embarking. Hamza, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First time calling, so please bear with me. But
I've just said I've only got 50 seconds now, mate. But I'm bearing with.
Right. Okay. Well, the main reason why I called to say is for all the Muslim community, it's very easy to condemn the attacks. But the difficult task that we face is what can we actually do about it? Because what's going on is the usual Imam and scholars are coming out, condemning the attack, telling the world that Islam doesn't teach this. But how long are we actually willing to accept this as enough? And
well, no one accepts it. I think that was the whole point. I mean, you can scream it as loudly as you want that you disapprove of it, but if people are determined not to believe you, there's nothing you can do about it. Last word to Wayne in Basildon. You demonstrated signs of trauma in your broadcast yesterday, James. I think you're probably right, mate, actually. And now the dust is settling. Your logic centres are taking charge of your thinking again. Some people can't do that and stay traumatised. Their decisions are irrational, but they believe they are right. You do a fantastic job of helping those who can't dislodge their pendulum from the irrational side. And that's why they pay you the big bucks. You're having a laugh, aren't you?